23. He awoke at 9 the next morning. Bright sunshine streamed and reached up and snared it. The bedroom's east windows. The telephone was ringing. Louis. Hello? Hi, Rachel said. Did I wake you up? Hope so. You woke me up, you bitch, he said, smiling. Ooh, such nasty language, you bad old bear, she said. I tried to call you last night. Were you over at Judd's? He hesitated for only the tiniest fraction of a moment. Yes, he said. Had a few beers. Norma was up at some sort of Thanksgiving supper. I thought about giving you a ring, but, you know. They chatted a while. Rachel updated him on her family, something he could have done without, although he took a small, mean satisfaction in the news that her father's bald spot seemed to be expanding at a faster rate. You want to talk to Gage? Rachel asked. Louis grinned. Yeah, I guess so, he said. Don't let him hang up the phone like he did the other time. Much rattling at the other end. Dimly he heard Rachel cajoling the kid to say hi, Daddy. At last Gage said, Hi, Day. Hi, Gage, Louis said cheerful. How you doing? How's your life? Did you pull over Granda's pipe rack again? Maybe this time you can trash his stamp collection as well. Gage babbled on happily for 30 seconds or so, interspersing his gobbles and grunts with a few recognizable words from his growing vocabulary. Mommy, Ellie, Granda, Grandma, car, pronounced in the best Yankee tradition as ca. Louis was amused to note twuck and sbit. Gee. At last Rachel pried the phone away from him to Gage's wail of indignation and Louis's measured relief. He loved his son and missed him like mad. But holding a conversation with a not quite 2-year-old was like trying to play cribbage with a lunatic. The cards kept going everywhere and sometimes you found yourself pegging backwards. So how's everything there? Rachel asked. Okay, Louis said, with no hesitation at all this time, but he was aware he had crossed a line, back when Rachel had asked him if he had gone over to Judd's last night and he told her he had. In his mind he suddenly heard Judd Crandall saying, the soil of a man's bear is stonier, Louis. A man grows what be can, and be tends it. Well, a little dull, if you want to know the God's honest. Miss you. You actually mean to tell me you're not enjoying your vacation from this sideshow? Oh, I like the quiet, he admitted, sure. But it gets strange after the first 24 hours or so. Can I talk to Daddy? It was Ellie in the background. Louis? Ellie's here. Okay, put her on. He talked to Ellie for almost 5 minutes. She prattled on about the doll Grandma had gotten her, about the trip she and Granda had taken to the stockyards. Boy, do they stink, Daddy, Ellie said, and Louis thought, your Granda's no rose, either, sweetie, about how she had helped make bread, and about how Gage had gotten away from Rachel while she was changing him. Gage had run down the hallway and pooped right in the doorway leading into Granda's study. Atta boy, Gage. Louis thought, a big grin spreading over his face. He actually thought he was going to get away at least for this morning and was getting ready to ask Ellie for her mother. Church, Daddy? Does he miss me? Again so he could say goodbye to her when Ellie asked. How's the grin faded from Louis's mouth, but he answered readily and with the perfect note of offhanded casualness. He's fine, guess. I gave him the leftover beef stew last night and then put him out. Haven't seen him this morning, but I just woke up. Oh boy, you would have made a great murderer, cool as a cucumber. Dr. Creed, when did you last see the deceased? He came in for supper. Had a plate of beef stew, in fact. I haven't seen him since then. Well, give him a kiss for me. Yuck, kiss your own cat, Louis said, and Ellie giggled. You want to talk to Mommy again, Daddy? Sure, put her on. Then it was over. He talked to Rachel for another couple of minutes. The subject of church was not touched upon. He and his wife exchanged love yous, and Louis hung up. That's that, he said to the empty, sunny room, and maybe the worst thing about it was that he didn't feel bad, didn't feel guilty at all. 24. Steve Masterton called around 9:30 and asked if Louis would like to come up to the university and play some racquetball. The place was deserted, he said gleefully, and they could play the whole goddamn day if they wanted to. Louis could understand the glee when the university was in session. The waiting list for a racquetball court was sometimes 2 days long, but he declined all the same, telling Steve he wanted to work on an article he was writing for the magazine of college medicine. You sure? Steve asked. All work and no play make Jack a dull boy, you know. Check me later, Lewis said. Maybe I'll be up for it. Steve said he would and hung up. Lewis had told only a half lie. This time, he did plan to work on his article, which concerned itself with treating contagious ailments such as chicken pox and mononucleosis in the infirmary environment. The main reason he had turned down Steve's offer was that he was a mass of aches and pains. He had discovered this as soon as he finished talking to Rachel and went into the bathroom to brush his teeth. His back muscles creaked and groaned, his shoulders were sore from lugging the cat in that damned garbage bag, and the hamstrings in back of his knees felt like guitar strings tuned 3 octaves past their normal pitch. Christ, he thought, and you had the stupid idea you were in some kind of shape. He would have looked cute trying to play racquetball with Steve, lumbering around like an arthritic old man. And speaking of old men, he hadn't made that hike into the woods the night before by himself. He had gone with a guy who was closing in on 85. He wondered if Judd was hurting as badly as he was this morning. He spent an hour and a half working on his article, but it did not march very well. The emptiness and the silence began to get on his nerves, and at last he stacked his yellow legal pads and the off-prints he had ordered from Johns Hopkins on the shelf above his typewriter, put on his parka, and crossed the road. Judd and Norma weren't there, but there was an envelope tacked to the porch with his name written across the front of it. He took it down and opened the flap with his thumb. Lewis, the good wife and me are off to Bucksport to do some shopping and to look at a Welsh dresser at the Emporium Galorium that Norma's had beer eye on for about 100 years, it seems like. Probably we'll have a spot of lunch at McLeod's while we're there and come back in the late afternoon. Come on over for a beer or two tonight, if you want. Your family is your family. I don't want to be no Butinsky, but if Ellie were my daughter, I wouldn't rush to tell Beer that Beer Cat got killed on the highway. Why not let her enjoy her holiday? By the way, Lewis, I wouldn't talk about what we did last night either, not around North Ludlow. There are other people who know about that old Micmac burying ground, and there are WHER people in town who have buried their animals there. You might say it's another part of the pet cemetery. Believe it or not, there is even a bull buried up there. Old Zach Moe Govern, who used to live out on Stackpole Reed, buried his prize bull Hanranny in the Micmac burying ground back in 1967 or 68. Ha, ha, he rolled me that he and Bis 2 boys bad sackin' that bull out there and I laughed until I thought I would rupture myself. But people around here don't like to talk about it, and they don't like people T-Bay consider to be outsiders, to know abuse it, not because some of these old superstitions go back 300 years or more, although they do, but because they sort of believe in those superstitions, and they think any outsider who knows that they do must be laughing at them. Does that make any sense? I suspect it doesn't, bust subject, will you? Nevertheless, that's how it is. So just do me a favor and keep shut on. We will talk more about this, probably tonight, and by then you will understand more, but in the meantime I want to tell you that you did yourself proud. I knew you would. Judd. P.S. Norma doesn't know what this note says. I told her something different and I would just as soon keep it that way if it's all the same to you. I've told Norma more than one lie in the 58 years we've been married, and I'd guess that most men tell their wives a smart of lies, but you know, most of them could stand before God and confess them without dropping their eyes from his. Well, drop over tonight and we'll do a little boozing. J. Lewis stood on the top step leading to Judd and Norma's porch, now bare, its comfortable rattan furniture stored to wait for another spring, frowning over this note. Don't tell Ellie the cat had been killed. He hadn't. Other animals buried there. Superstitions going back 300 years? And by then you will understand more. He touched this line lightly with his finger, and for the thin seam allowed his mind to deliberately turn back to what they had done the night before. It was blurred in his memory, it bade the melting, cotton candy texture of dreams or of waking actions been formed under a light haze of drugs. He could recall climbing the deadfall and the odd, brighter quality of light in the bog thack and the way it had felt 10 or 20 degrees warmer there. All of it was like the conversation you had with the anesthetist just before he or she put you out like a light. And Eld guess most men tell their wives a smart of lies. Wives and daughters as well, Lewis thought, but it was eerie, the way Judd seemed almost to know what had transpired this morning, both on the telephone and in his own head. Slowly he refolded the note, which had been written on a sheet of lined paper like that in a schoolboy's blue horse tablet, and put it back into the envelope. He put the envelope into his hip pocket and crossed the road again. 25. It was around 1 o'clock that afternoon when Church came back like the cat in the nursery rhyme. Lewis was in the garage, where he had been working off and on for the last 6 weeks on a fairly ambitious set of shelves. He wanted to put all of the dangerous garage stuff such as bottles of windshield wiper fluid, antifreeze, and sharp tools on these shelves, where they would be out of Gage's reach. He was hammering in a nail when Church strolled in, his tail high. Lewis did not drop the hammer or even slam his thumb. His heart jogged in his chest but did not leap. A hot wire seemed to glow momentarily in his stomach and then cool immediately, like the filament of a light bulb that glows overbrightly for a moment and then burns out. It was as if, he told himself later, he had spent that entire sunny post-Thanksgiving Friday morning waiting for Church to come back, as if he had known in some deeper, more primitive part of his mind what their nigh hike up to the Micmac burying ground had meant all along. He put the hammer down carefully, spat the nails he had dumped them into the pockets of his workman's apron. He went to Church and picked the car up, holding in his mouth back into his palm, and then weighs what he did before he was hit. This is live weigh. He was heavier live weight, he thought with a kind of sick excitement. He was beevier when B was dead. His heart took a bigger jog this time, almost a leap, and for a moment the garage seemed to swim in front of his eyes. Church laid his ears back and allowed himself to be held. Lewis carried him out into the sunlight and sat down on the back steps. The cat tried to get down then, but Lewis stroked him and held him on his lap. His heart seemed to be taking regular jogs now. He probed gently into the heavy ruff of fur at Church's neck, remembering the sick, boneless way Church's head had swiveled on his broken neck the night before. He felt nothing now but good muscle and tendon. He held Church up and looked at the cat's muzzle closely. What he saw there caused him to drop the cat onto the grass quickly and to cover his face with one hand, his eyes shut. The whole world was swimming now, and his head was full of a tottery, sick vertigo. Was the sort of feeling he could remember from the bitter end of long drunks, just before the puking started. There was dried blood caked on Church's muzzle, and caught in his long whiskers were 2 tiny shreds of green plastic. Bits of hefty bag. We will talk more about this and by then you will understand more. Oh, Christ, he understood more than he wanted to right now. Give me a chance, Lewis thought, and I'll understand myself right into the nearest mental asylum. He let Church into the house, got his blue dish, and opened a tuna and liver cat dinner. As he spooned the gray-brown mess out of the can, Church purred unevenly and rubbed back and forth along Lewis's ankles. The feel of the cat caused Lewis to break out in gooseflesh, and he had to clench his teeth grimly to keep from kicking him away. His furry sides felt somehow too slick, too thick, in a word, loathsome. Lewis found B didn't care if he never touched Church again. When he bent and put the dish on the floor, Church streaked past him to get it, and Lowe's could have sworn he smelled earth, as if it had been ground into the cat's fur. He stood back, watching the cat eat. He could hear him smacking. Had Church smacked over his food that way before? Perhaps he had, and Lewis had just never noticed. Either way, it was a disgusting sound. Gross, Ellie would have said. Abruptly Lewis turned and went upstairs. He started at a walk, but by the time he got to the upper hallway, he was almost running. He undressed, tossing all of his clothes in the laundry ham. For although he had put them on fresh from the underwear out that morning, he drew himself a hot bath, as hot as he could take it, and plopped in. The steam rose around him, and he could feel the hot water working on his muscles, loosening them. The bath was also working on his head, loosening that. By the time the water had begun to cool, he was feeling dozy and pretty much all right again. The cat came back, just like the cat in the nursery RBYME, all right, so what, big deal. It had been all a mistake. Hadn't he thought to himself yesterday evening that Church looked remarkably whole and unmarked for an animal that had been struck by a car? Think of all the woodchucks and cats and dogs you've seen strewn all over the highway, he thought, their bodies burst, their guts everywhere. Technicolor, as Loudon Wainwright says on that record about the dead. Run. It was obvious now. Church had been struck hard and stunned. The cat he had carried up to Judd's old Micmac burying ground had been unconscious, not dead. Didn't they say cats had 9 lives? Thank God he hadn't said anything to Ellie. She wouldn't ever have to know how close Church had come. The blood on Biss' mouth and woof. The way Biss' neck turned. But he was a doctor, not a vet. He had made a misdiagnosis, that was all. It had hardly been under the best circumstances for close examination, squatting on Judd's lawn in 20-degree temperatures, the light almost gone from the sky. And he had been wearing gloves. That could have. A bloated, misshapen shadow rose on the tiled bathroom wall, like the head of a small dragon or of some monstrous snake. Something touched his bare shoulder lightly and skidded. Louis jerked upward galvanically, splashing water out of the tub and soaking the bathmar. He turned, cringing back at the same time, and stared into the muddy yellow-green eyes of his daughter's cat, who was perched on the lowered seat of the toiler. Church was swaying slowly back and forth as if drunk. Louis watched, his body crawling with revulsion, a scream barely held back in his mouth by his clamped teeth. Church had never looked like this, had never swayed, like a snake trying to hypnotize its prey, not before he was fixed and not afterward. The first and last time he played with the idea that this was a different cat, one that just looked like Ellie's, a cat that had just wandered into his garage while he was putting up those shelves, and that the real Church was still buried under that cairn on the bluff in the woods. But the markings were the same, and the one ragged ear, and the paw that had that funny chewed look. Ellie had slammed that paw in the back door of their little suburban house when Church was little more than a kitten. It was Church, all right. Get out of here, Louis whispered hoarsely at him. Church stared at him a moment longer. God, his eyes were different. Somehow they were different, and then leapt down from the toilet seat. He landed with none of the uncanny grace cats usually display. He staggered awkwardly, haunches thudding against the tub, and then he was gone. Louis thought. Not be it. Remember, it's been spayed. He got out of the tub and dried off quickly, jerkily. He was shaved and mostly dressed when the phone rang, shrill in the empty house. When it sounded, Louis whirled, eyes wide, hands going up. He lowered them slowly. His heart was racing, his muscles felt full of adrenaline. It was Steve Masterton, checking back about racquetball, and Louis agreed to meet him at the Memorial Gym in an hour. He could not really afford the time, and racquetball was the last thing in the world he felt like right now, but he had to get He wanted to get away from the cat, that weird cat which had business being there at all. He hurried, tucking in his shirt quickly, stuffing a pair of shorts, a t-shirt, and a towel into his zipper bag, and trotting down the stairs. Church was lying on the 4th riser from the bottom. Louis tripped over the cat and almost fell. He managed to grab the banister and barely save himself from what could have been a nasty fall. He stood at the bottom of the stairs, breathing in snatches, his heart racing, the adrenaline whipping unpleasantly through his body. Church stood up, stretched, and seemed to grin at him. Louis left. He should have put the cat out, he knew that, he didn't. At that particular moment he didn't think he could bring himself to touch it. 26. Judd lit a cigarette with a wooden kitchen match, shook it out, and tossed the stub into a tin ashtray with a barely readable Jim Beam advertisement painted on its bottom. It was Stanley Bouchard who told me about the place. He paused, thinking. Barely touched glasses of beer stood before them on the checked oilcloth that covered the kitchen table. Behind them, the barrel of range oil clamped to the wall gurgled 3 times, deliberately, and was still. Louis had caught a pickup supper with Steve submarine sandwiches in the mostly deserted Bear's Den. He had found out early that if you asked for a hoagie or a grinder or a gyro in Maine, they didn't know what you were talking about. Ask for a sub or a Whop burger, and you were in business. With some food in him, Lewis began to feel better about churches. Return, felt that he had things more in perspective, but he could be, let's face it, gang anywhere at all, still not anxious to return to his dark, empty house where the cat Norma sat with them for quite a while, watching TV and working on a sampler that showed the sun going down behind a small county meeting house. The cross on the roof tree was silhouetted black against the setting sun. Something to sell, she said, at the church sale the week before Christmas. Always a BIP event. Her fingers moved well, pushing the needle through the dith, pulling it up through the steel circle. Her arthritis was barely noticeable tonight. Lewis supposed it might be the weather, which had been cold but very dry. She had recovered nicely from her heart attack, and on that evening less than 10 weeks before a cerebral accident would kill her, he thought that she looked less haggard and actually younger. On that evening he could see the girl she had been. At 9:45 she said goodnight, and now he sat here with Judd, who had ceased speaking and seemed only to be following his cigarette smoke up and up, like a kid watching a barber pole to see where the stripes go. Stanny B, Lewis prompted gently. Judd blinked and seemed to come back to himself. Oh, AYUH, he said. Everyone in Ludlow round Bucksport and Prospect and Orrington too, I guess, just called him Stanny B that year my dog Spot died 1910. One mean, the first time he died Stanny Pa already an old man and more than a lead crazy. There was others around these parts that knew the Micmac burying ground was there, but it was Stanny B I heard it from, and he knew about it from his father before him. A whole family of proper Canucks, they were. Judd laughed and sipped his beer. I can still hear him talking in that broken English of his. He found me sitting behind the livery stable that used to stand on Route 15, except it was just the Bangor-Bucksport road back then tight aboard where the Orenco plant is now. Spot wasn't dead but he was going, and my dad sent me away to check on some chicken feed, which old Yorkie sold back then. We didn't need chicken feed any more than a cow needs a blackboard, and knew well enough why he sent me down there. He was going to kill the dog? He knew how tenderly I felt about Spot, so he sent me away while he did it. One saw about the chicken feed, and while old Yorkie set it out for me I went around back and sat down on old grindstone that used to be there and just bawled. Judd shook his head slowly and gently, still smiling a little. And along comes old Stanny B, he said. Half the people in town thought he was soft, and the other half thought he might be dangerous. His grandfather was a big fur trapper and trader in the early 1800s. Stanny's granda would go all the way from the Maritimes to Bangor and Derry, sometimes as far south as Skowhegan to buy pelts, or so I've heard. He drove a big wagon covered with rawhide strips like something out of a medicine show. He had crosses all over it, for he was a proper Christian and would preach on the resurrection when he was drunk enough. This is what Stanny said. He loved to talk about his granda, but he had pagan Indian signs all over it as well because he believed that all Indians, no matter what the tribe, belonged to one big tribe that lost one of Israel the Bible talks about. He said he believed all Indians were hellbound, but that their magic worked because they were Christians all the same, in some queer, damned way. Stanny's granda bought from the Micmacs and did a good business with them long after most of the other trappers and traders had given up or gone west because he traded with them at a fair price and because, Stanny said, he knew the whole Bible by heart, and the Micmacs liked to hear him speak the words Che Blackrobes had spoken to them in the years before the buckskin men and woodsmen came. He fell silent. Lewis waited. The Micmacs told Stanny B's granda about the burying ground which they didn't use anymore because the Wendigo had soured the ground, and about Little God Swamp, and the steps, and all the rest. The Wendigo story, now, that was something you could hear in those days all over the North Country. It was a story they had to the same way guess we have to have some of our Christian stories. Norma would damn me for a profaner if she heard me say or do something else. Who would finally get down to the bad place where it was starve hard and the food was short? There were North Country Indians chat, but Lewis, it's true. Sometimes, if the winter was long and Judd shrugged. Maybe they'd pick out someone who cannibalism was old and used up, and then there would be stew for a while. And the story they worked out would be that the Wendigo had walked through their village or encampment while they were sleeping and touched them. And the Wendigo was supposed to give those it touched a taste for the flesh of their own kind. Lewis nodded, saying the devil made them do it. Sure, my own guess is that the Micmacs around here had to do it at some point and that they buried the bones of whoever they ate. 1 or 2, maybe even 10 or a dozen up there in their burying ground. And then decided the ground had gone sour, Lewis muttered. So here's Stanny B, come out in back of the livery to get his jug, I guess, Judd said, already half crocked, he was. His grandfather was worth maybe $1 million when he died, or so people said, and Stanny B was nothing but the local ragman. He asked me what was wrong, and I told him. He saw I'd been bawling, and he told me there was a way it could be fixed up, if I was brave and sure I wanted it fixed up. I said I'd give anything to have Spot well again, and I asked him if he knew a vet that could do it. Don't know no vet, me, Stanny said, but I know how to fix your dog, boy. You go home now and tell your dad to put that dog in a grain sack, but you ain't gonna bury him, no. You gonna drag him up to the pet cemetery and you gonna put him in the shade by that big dead fall. Then you gonna come back and say it's done. I asked him what good that would do, and Stanny told me to stay awake that night and come out when he threw a stone against my window. And it'd be midnight, boy, so if you forget Stanny B and go to sleep, Stanny B gonna forget you, and it's goodbye dog, let him go straight to hell. Judd looked at Lewis and lit another cigarette. It went just the way Stanny set it up. When I got back, my dad said he'd put a bullet in Spot's head to spare him any more suffering. I didn't even have to say anything about the pet cemetery. My dad asked me if I didn't think Spot would want me to bury him up there, and I said I guessed he would. So off I went, dragging my dog in a grain sack. My dad asked me if I wanted help, and I said no, because I remembered what Stanny B said. I laid awake that night forever, seemed like. You know how time is for kids. It would seem to me I must have stayed awake right around until morning, and then the clock would only chime 10 or 11. A couple of times I almost nodded off, but each time I snapped wide awake again. It was almost as if someone had shaken me and said, "Wake up, Judd. Wake up," like something wanted to make sure I stayed awake. Lewis raised his eyebrows at that, and Judd shrugged. When the clock in the downstairs hall chimed 12, I got right up and sat there dressed on my bed with the moon shinin' in the window. Next I know, the clock is chimmin' the half hour, then 1 o'clock, and still no Stanny B. He's forgot all about me, that dumb Frenchman, I think to myself, and I'm getting ready to take my clothes off again when these 2 pebbles whop off the window, damn near hard enough to break the glass. One of them did put a crack in a pane, but I never noticed it until the next morning, and my mother didn't see it until the next winter, and by then she thought the frost done it. I just about flew across to that window and heaved it up. It grated and rumbled against the frame, the way they only seem to do when you're a kid and you want to get out after midnight. Lewis laughed, even though he could not remember ever having wanted to get out of the house at some dark hour when he was a boy of 10. Still, if he had wanted to, he was sure that windows which had never creaked in the daytime would creak then. I figured my folks must have thought burglars were trying to break in, but when my heart quieted down, I could hear my dad still sawing wood in the bedroom on the first floor. I looked out and there was Stanny B, standin' in our driveway and lookin' up, swayin' like there was a high wind when there wasn't so much as a puff of breeze. I don't think he ever would have come, Lewis, except that he'd gotten to that stage of drunkenness where you're as wide awake as an owl with diarrhea and you just don't give a care about anything. And he sort of yells up at me, only I guess comin' up to get you. He thought he was whispering, "You comin' down, boy, or am I?" "Shush," I says, scared to death now that my dad will wake up and give me the whopping of my young life. "What did you say?" Stanny says, even louder than before. If my parents had been around on the roadside of this house, Lewis, I would have been a goner. But they had the bedroom that belongs to Norma and me now, with the river view. "Bet you got down those stairs in one hell of a hurry," Lewis said. "Have you got another beer, Judd?" He was already 2 past his usual limit, but tonight that seemed okay. Law night that seemed almost mandatory. I do, and you know where they're kept, Judd said and lit a fresh smoke. He waited until Lewis was seated again. No, I wouldn't have dared to try the stairs. They went past my parents' bedroom. I went down the ivy trellis, hand over hand, just as quick as I could. I was some scared, I can tell you, but I think I is more scared of my dad just then than I was of going up to the pet cemetery with Stanny B. He crushed out his smoke. We went up there, the two of us, and I guess Stanny B must tear Alan down half a dozen times if he fell down once. He was malf gone, smelled like he'd fallen into a vat of corn. One time he damn near put a stick through his throat, but he had a pick and shovel with him. When we got to the pet cemetery, I kind of expected he'd sling me the pick and shovel and just pass cat while I dug the hole. Instead he seemed to sober up a little. He told me we was on, up over the deadfall and deeper into the woods, where there was another burial place. I looked at Stanny, who was so drunk he could barely keep his feet, and I looked at that deadlil, and I said, "You can't climb that, Stanny B, you'll break your neck." And he said, "I ain't gonna break my neck, me, and neither a you. I can walk and you can lug your dog." And he was right. He sailed up over that deadfall just as smooth as silk, never even looking down, and I lugged Spot all the way up there, although he must have weighed 35 pounds or so and I only went about 90 myself. I want to tell you, though, Luce, I was some sore and sprung the next day. How do you feel today? Lewis didn't answer, only nodded. We walked and we walked, Judd said. It seemed to me we was gonna walk forever. The woods were spookier in those days. More birds calling from the trees, and you didn't know what any of 'em was. Animals moving around out there. Deer, most likely, but back then there were moose too and bears and catamounts. I dragged Spot. After a while I started to get the funny idea that old Stanny B was gone and I was following an Indian. And somewhere farther along he'd turn around, all grinning and black-eyed, his face streaked up with that stinking paint they made from bear fat. That he'd have a Tommy Hawk made out of a wedge of slate and a hake of ashwood all tied together which rawhide, and he'd grab me by the back of the neck and whack off my hair, along with the top of my skull. Stanny wasn't staggerin' or fallin' anymore. He just walked straight and easy, with his head up, and that sort of helped to feed the idea. But when we got to the edge of the Little God Swamp and he turned around to talk to me, I seen it was Stanny, all right, and the reason he wasn't stag-garrin' or fallin' anymore was because he was scared. Cert himself sober, he did. He told me the same things I told you last night, about the loons, and the St. Elmo's fire, and how I wasn't to take any notice of anything I saw or heard. Most of all, he said, don't speak to anything if it should speak to you. Then we started across the swamp. And I did see something. I ain't going to tell you what, only that I've been up there maybe 5 times since that time when I was 10, and I've never seen anything like it again. Not. What happens now? I ask Stanny B. Now you wait and see what may happen, Stanny says, and off he walks, staggering and lurching again. I imagine he slept in back of the livery that night, and as things turned my dog Spot lived Stanny B by 2 years. His liver went bad and poisoned him, and 2 Latate kids found him in the road on July 4, 1912, stiff as a poker. Pillow. In bed and telephone side Alamo a bow back henna did it. Next morning I didn't get up until almost 9 o'clock, and then my mother was calling me. My dad worked on the railroad, and he would have been gone since 6. Judd paused, thinking, my mother wasn't just calling me, Lewis. She was screaming for me. Judd went to the fridge, got himself a Miller's, and opened it on the drawer handle below the bread box and toaster. His face looked yellow in the overhead light, the color of nicotine. He drained half his beer, uttered a belch like a gunshock, and then glanced down the hall toward the room where Norma slept. He looked back at Lewis. This is hard for me to talk about, he said. I have turned it over in my mind, years and years, but I've never told anyone about it. Others knew what had happened, but they never talked to me about it. The way it is about sex, I guess. I'm telling you, Lewis, because you've got a different kind of pet now. Not necessarily a dangerous one, but different. Do you find that's true? Louis thought of Church jumping awkwardly off the toiler seat, his haunches thudding against the side of the tub. He thought of those muddy eyes that were almost but not quite stupid staring into his own. At last he nodded. When I got downstairs, my mother was backed into a corner in the pantry between our icebox and one of the counters. There was a bunch of white stuff on the floor curtains she'd been meaning to hang. Standing in the doorway of the pansy was Spot, my dog. There was dirt all over him and mud splashed clear up his legs. The fur on his belly was filthy, all knorted in. To do it, and we'd end up with our shirts off and our pants soaked, and my dad cussing and Spot looking sort of ashamed the way dogs do. And more likely than not he'd roll around in the right after and then go over by my mother's clothesline to shake off and put dirt all over the sheets she had hung, and she'd scream at both of us that she was going to shoot that dog for a strange before she got much older. But that day Spot just sat in the tub and let me wash him. He never moved at all. I didn't like it. It was like washing meat. I got an old piece of towel after gave him his bath and dried him all off. I could see the places where the barbed wire had hooked him. There was no fur in any of those places, and the flesh looked dimpled in. It is the way an old wound looks after it's been healed 5 years and more. Louis nodded. In his line of work, he had seen such things from time to time. The wound never seemed to fill in completely, and that made him think of Graves and his days as an undertaker's apprentice, and how there was never enough dirt to fill them in again. Then I saw his head. There was another of those dimples there, but the fur had grown back white in a little circle. It was near his ear. Where your father shot him, Louis said. Judd nodded. Shooting a man or an animal in the head isn't as surefire as it sounds, Judd. There are would-be suicides in vegetable wards of even walking around right as rain who didn't know that a bullet can strike the skull plate and travel right around it in a semicide, exiting the other side without ever penetrating the brain. I personally saw one case where a fellow shot himself above the right ear and died because the bullet went around his head and tore open his jugular vein on the other side of his head. That bullet path looked like a county road map. Judd smiled and nodded. I remember reading something like that in one of Norma's newspapers, the Star or the Inquirer, one of those. But if my pop said Spot was gone, Louis, he was gone. It was. All right, Louis said. If you say that's how it was, that is how it was. Was your daughter's car gone? I sure thought it was, Louis said. You got to do better than that. You're a doctor. You're God. I'm not God. It was dark _ You make it sound like you got to do better than that, Louis. Sure, it was dark, and his head swiveled on his neck like it was full of ball bearings, and when you moved him, he pulled out of under where you're layin' when you're dead. Louis sounded like a piece of sticky tape comin' off a live. Things don't do that. You only stop meltin' the frost in the other room. The clock struck 10:30. Dog? Louis asked. What did your father say when he came home and saw the... I was out in the driveway, shooting marbles in the dirt, more or less waitin' for him. I felt like I always felt when I'd done something wrong and knew I was probably gonna get a spankin'. He come in through the gateposts about 8 o'clock, wearin' his bib overalls and his pillow tick cap. You ever see one of those? Louis nodded, then stifled a yawn with the back of his hand. Yeah, getting late, Judd said. Got to finish this up. It's not that late, Louis said. I am just a few beers ahead of my usual pace. Go on, Judd. Take your time. I want to hear this. My dad had an old lard tin he kept his dinner in, Judd said, and he come in through the gate swingin' it, empty, by the Honda, you know. Whistlin' somethin'. It was gettin' dark, but he seen me there in the gloom and he says, "Hi there, Judkins," like he would do, and then, "Where's your..." He got that far, and then here comes Spot out of the dark, not runnin' like he usually did, ready to jump all over him. He was so glad to see him, but just walkin', waggin' his tail, and my dad dropped that lard bucket and stepped back. I don't know what he would have turned tail and run except his back hit the picket fence and then he just stood there, looking at the dog. And when Spot did jump up, Dad just caught his paws and held them, like you might hold a lady's hands you was getting ready to dance with. He looked at the dog for a long time and then he looked at me, and he said, "He needs a bath, Judd." He stinks of the ground you buried him in. And then he went in the house. What did you do? Louis asked. Gave him another bath. He just sat there in the tub and took it again. And when I went in Che house, my mother had gone to bed, even though it wasn't even 9 o'clock. My dad said, we got to talk, Judkins. And I sat down across from him, and he talked to me like a man for the first time in my life, with the smell of the honeysuckle coming across the road from What's Your House Now and the smell of the wild roses from our own house. Judd Crandall sighed. I had always thought it would be good to have him talk to me that way, but it wasn't. It wasn't a big good. All this conite, Louise, it's like when you look into a mirror that's been set up right across from another mirror, and you can see yourself going down a whole hall of mirrors. How many times has this story been passed along, I wonder? A story that's just the same, except for the names? And that's like the sex thing too, isn't it? Your dad knew all about it. Who took you up there, Judd? He asked me, and I told him. He just nodded like it was what he would have expected. I guess it probably was, although I found out later that there were 6 or 8 people in Ludlow at that time that could have taken me up there. I guess he knew that Stanny B was the only one crazy enough to have actually done it. Did you ask him why he didn't take you, Judd? I did, Judd said. Somewhere during that long talk I did ask him that. And he said it was a bad place, by and large, and it didn't often do anything good for people who had lost their animals or for the animals themselves. He asked me if I liked Spot the way he was, and do you know, Louis, I had the hardest time answering that. And it's important that I tell you my feelings on that, because sooner or later you're going to ask me why I led you up there with your daughter's cat if it was a bad thing to do. Isn't that so? Louis nodded. What was Ellie going to think about church when she got back? That had been much on his mind while he and Steve Masterton had been playing racquetball that afternoon. Maybe I did it because kids need to know that sometimes dead is better, Judd said with some difficulty. That's something your Blay don't know, and got a feelin' that maybe she don't me if I'm wrong, and we'll leave it. No, because your white don't know. Now, you go ahead and tell. Louis opened his mouth and then closed it again. Judd went on, now speaking very slowly, appearing to move from word to word as they had moved from hummock to hummock in Little God Swamp the night before. I've seen it happen over the years, he said. I guess I told you that Lester Morgan buried his prize bull up there. Black Angus named Hanratty. Ain't that a silly name for a bull? Died of some sort of ulcer inside, and Lester dragged him all the way up there on a sledge. How he did it, how he got over the deadfall there, I dunno, but it's said that what you want to do, you can. And at least as far as that burying ground goes, I'd say it's true. Well, Hanratty came back, but Lester shot him dead 2 weeks later. That bull turned mean, really mean. But he's the only animal I ever heard of that did. Most of them just seem a little stupid, a little slow, a little dead? Yeah, Judd said, a little dead, like they had been somewhere, and came back, but not all the way. Now, your daughter isn't going to know that, Louis. Not that her cat was hit by a car, and killed, and came back. So you could say you can't teach a child a lesson unless the child knows there's a lesson to be learned. Except sometimes you can, Louis said, more to himself than to Judd. Yes, Judd agreed, sometimes you can. Maybe she'll learn something about what death really is, which is where the pain stops and the good memories begin. Not the end of life but the end of pain. You don't tell her those things, she will figure them out on her own. And if she's anything like me, she'll go on loving her pet. It won't turn vicious, or bite, or anything like that. She'll go on loving it, but she'll draw her own conclusions, and shall breathe a sigh of relief when it finally dies. That's why you took me up there, Louis said. He felt better now. He had an explanation. It was diffuse, it relied more upon the logic of the nerve endings than the logic of the rational mind, but under the circumstances, he found he could accept that. And it meant he could forget the expression he thought he had seen on Judd's face briefly last night, that dark, capering glee. Okay, that's. Abruptly, almost shockingly, Judd covered his face with both hands. For one moment Louis thought he had been struck by a sudden pain, and he half rose, concerned, until he saw the convulsion Heave of the chest and realized that the old man was struggling not to cry. That's why, but it ain't why, he said in a strangled, choked voice. I did it for the same reason Stanny B did it and for the same reason Lester Morgan did it. Lester took Linda Levesque up there after her dog got run over in the road. He took her up there even though he had to put his goddamn bull out of its misery for chasing kids through its pasture like it was mad. He did it anyway, Lewis, Judd almost moaned. And what the Christ do you make of that? Judd, what are you talking about? Lewis asked, alarmed. Lester did it and Stanny did it for the same reason I did it. You do it because it gets hold of you. You do it because that burial place is a secret place, and you want to share the secret, and when you find a reason that seems good enough, why? Judd took his hands away from his face and looked at Lewis with eyes that seemed incredibly ancient, incredibly haggard. Why then you just go ahead and do it. You make up reasons. They seem like good reasons, but mostly you do it because you want to. Or because you have to. My dad, he didn't take me up there because he'd heard about it but he'd never been. Stanny B had been up there, and he took me, and 70 years ago and then, all at once. Demallary. Judd shook his head and coughed dryly into the palm of his hand. Listen, he said. Listen, Lewis. Lester's bull was the only damn animal one ever knew of that turned really mean. I believe that Mrs. Levesque's little chow might have bit the postman once, at her, and I heard a few other things. Animals that got a little nasty. But Spot was always a good dog. He always smelled like dirt, it didn't matter how many times you washed him. He always smelled like dirt. He was a good dog. My mother would never touch him afterward, but he was a good dog just the same. But louts, you was to take your cat out tonight and kill it, I would never say a word. That place. All at once it gets hold of you, and you make up the sweetest smelling reasons in the world. But I could have been wrong, Lewis. That's all I'm saying. Lester could have been wrong. Stanny B could have been wrong. Hell, I ain't God either. But bringing the dead back to life. That's about as close to playing God as you can get, ain't it? Lewis opened his mouth again, then closed it again. What would have come out would have sounded wrong and cruel. Judd, I didn't go through all that just to kill the damn cat again. Judd drained his beer and then put it carefully aside with the other empties. I guess that's it, he said. I am talked out. Can I ask you one other question? Lewis asked. I guess so, Judd said. Lewis said, has anyone ever buried a person up there? Judd's arm jerked convulsively. 2 of the beer bottles fell off the table, and one of them shattered. Christ on his throne, he said to Lewis. No, and whoever would. You don't even want to talk about such things, Lewis. I was just curious, Lewis said uneasily. Some things it don't pay to be curious about, Judd Crandall said, and for the first time he looked really old and infirm to Lowe's Creed, as if he were standing somewhere in the neighborhood of his own freshly prepared grave. And later, at home, something else occurred to him about how Judd had looked at that moment. He had looked like he was lying. 27 Lewis didn't really know he was drunk until he got back in his own garage. Outside there was starlight and a chilly rind of moon. Not enough light to cast a shadow, but enough to see by. Once he got in the garage, he was blind. There was a little switch somewhere, but he was damned if he could remember anymore just where it was. He felt his way along slowly, shuffling his feet, his head swimming, anticipating a painful crack on the knee or a toy that he would stumble over, frightening himself with its crash, perhaps falling over himself. Ellie's little Schwinn with its red training wheels. Gage's crawly gator. Where was the cat? Had he left him in? Somehow he sailed off course and ran into the wall. A splinter whispered into one palm and he cried out, shit, to the darkness, realizing after the word was out that it sounded more scared than mad. The whole garage seemed to have taken a stealthy half-turn. Now it wasn't just the light switch. Now he didn't know where the fuck anything was, and that included the door into the kitchen. He began walking again, moving slowly, his palm stinging. This is what it would be like to be blind, he thought, and that made him think of a Stevie Wonder concert he and Rachel had gone to, when? 6 years ago? As impossible as it seemed, it had to be. She had been pregnant with Ellie then. Two guys had led Wonder to his synthesizer, guiding him over the cables that snaked across the stage so he wouldn't stumble. And later, when he had gotten up to dance with one of the backup singers, she had led him carefully to a clear place on the floor. He had danced well, Lewis remembered thinking. He had danced well, but he had needed a hand to lead him to the space where he could do it. How about a band right now to lead me to my kitchen door? He thought, and abruptly shuddered. If a hand came out of the darkness now to lead him, how he would scream, scream and scream and scream. He stood still, heart-thudding. Come on, he told himself. Stop TBISSBIT, come on, he told himself. Stop, where was that fucking cat? Then he did slam into something, the rear bumper of the station wagon, and the pain sang up his body from his barked shin, making his eyes water. He grabbed his leg and rubbed it, standing one-legged like a heron, but at least he knew where he was now, the geography of the garage fixed firmly in his mind again, and besides, his night vision was coming, good old visual purple. He had left the cat in, he remembered that now, hadn't really wanted to touch it, to pick it up and put it out, and that was when Church's hot, furry body oiled against his ankle like a low eddy of water, followed by its loathsome tail, curling against his calf like a clutching snake. And then Lewis did scream. He opened his mouth wide and screamed. 28. Daddy! Ellie screamed. She ran up the jetway toward him, weaving in and out between deplaning passengers like a quarterback on a keeper play. Most of them stood aside, grinning. Lewis was a little embarrassed by her ardor, but he felt a large, stupid grin spreading across his own face just the same. Rachel was carrying Gage in her arms, and he saw Lewis when Ellie shouted. "Day!" He yelled exuberantly and began to wriggle in Rachel's arms. She smiled, a trifle wearily, Lewis thought, and set him on his feet. He began to run after Ellie, his legs pumping busily. Day! Day! Lewis had time to notice that Gage was wearing a jumper he had never seen before. It looked like more of Granta's work to Lewis. Then Ellie hurtled into him and shinnied up him like a tree. "Hi, Daddy!" she bellowed and smacked his cheek heartily. "Hi, hun," he said and bent over to catch Gage. He pulled him up into the crook of his arm and hugged them both. "I am glad to see you back." Rachel came up then, her traveling bag and pocket boss slung over one arm, Gage's diaper bag slung over the other. "To be a big boy soon" was printed on the other side of the diaper bag, a sentiment probably meant more to cheer up the pair than the diaper-wearing child. She looked like a professional photographer at the end of a long, grueling assignment. Luce bent between his two kids and planted a kiss on her mouth. Hi, Doc," she said, and smiled. "You look beat." "I am beat. We got as far as Boston with no problem. We changed planes with no problem. We took off with no problem. But as the plane is banking over the city, Gage looks down and says, pretty, and then whoopses all over himself. Oh, Jesus. I got him changed in the toilet," she said. "I don't think it's a virus or anything. He was just airsick." "Come on home," Lewis said. "I've got chili on the stove." Chili. Ellie screamed in Lewis's ear, transported with delight and excitement. Chihuahua. Gage screamed in Lewis's other ear, which at least equalized the ringing. "Come on," Lewis said. "Let's get your suitcases and blow this joint." "Daddy, how's church?" Ellie asked as he set her down. It was a question Lewis had expected, but not Ellie's anxious face, and the deep worry line that appeared between her dark blue eyes. Lewis frowned and then glanced at Rachel. "She woke up screaming over the weekend," Rachel said quietly. "She had a nightmare. I dreamed that church got run over," Ellie said. "Too many turkey sandwiches after the big day, that's my guess," Rachel said. "She had a bout of diarrhea too. Set her mind at rest, Lewis, and let's get out of this airport. I've seen enough airports in the last week to last me for at least 5 years." "Why, church is fine, honey," Lewis said slowly. "Yes, B's fine. He lies around the bouse all day long and looks at me with shows strange, muddy eyes as if he'd seen something that had blasted away most of whatever intelligence a cat has. He's just great. I put Bin out with a broom at night because I don't like to touch Bim, I just kind of sweep at him with it and he goes. And the other day when I opened the door, Ellie, he had a mouse or what was left of it. He'd strewed the guts hell to breakfast. And speaking of breakfast, I skipped mine that morning. Otherwise, he's just fine. Oh, Ellie said, and that furrow between her eyes smoothed out. Oh, that's good. When I had that dream, I was sure he was dead. Were you? Lewis asked, and smiled. Dreams are funny, aren't they? Dweems. Gage hollered. He had reached the parrot stage that Lewis remembered from Ellie's development. Dweems. He gave Lewis's hair a hearty tug. Come on, gang, Lewis said, and they started down to the baggage area. They had gotten as far as the station wagon in the parking lot when Gage began saying, pretty, in a strange, hiccuping voice. This time he whooped all over Lewis, who had put on a new pair of double-knit slacks for the plane meeting occasion. Apparently Gage thought pretty was the code word for I've got to T-brow up now, so sorry, stand clear. It turned out to be a virus after all. By the time they had driven the 17 miles from the Bangor airport to their house in Ludlow, Gage had begun to show signs of fever and had fallen into an uncomfortable doze. Lewis backed into the garage, and out of the corner of his eye he saw Church slink along one wall, tail up, strange eyes fixed on the car. It disappeared into the dying glow of the day, and a moment later Lewis saw a disemboweled mouse lying beside a stack of 4 summer tires had had the snows put on while Rachel and the kids were gone. The mouse's innards glowed pink and raw in the garage's gloom. Lewis got out quickly and purposely bumped against the pile of tires, which were stacked up like black checkers. The top 2 fell over and covered the mouse. Oops, he said. You're a spaz, Daddy, Ellie said, not unkindly. That's right, Lewis said with a kind of hectic cheer. He felt a little like saying pretty, and blowing his groceries all over everything. Daddy's a spaz. He could remember Church killing only a single rat before his queer resurrection. He sometimes cornered mice and played with them in that deadly cat way that ultimately ended in destruction, but he or Ellie or Rachel had always intervened before the end. And once cats were fixed, he knew, few of them would do more than give a mouse an interested stare, at least as long as they were well fed. Are you going to stand there dreaming or help me with this kid? Rachel asked. Come back from Planet Mongo, Dr. Creed. Earth people need you. She sounded tired and irritable. I'm sorry, babe, Lewis said. He came around to get Gage, who was now as hot as the coals in a banked stove. So only the 3 of them ate Lewis's famous Southside chili that night. Gage reclined on the living room sofa, feverish and apathetic, drinking a bottle filled with lukewarm chicken broth and watching a cartoon show on TV. After dinner Ellie went to the garage door and called Church. Lewis, who was doing the dishes while Rachel unpacked upstairs, hoped the cat wouldn't come, but he did. He came in walking in his new slow lurch, and he came almost at once, as if it had been lurking out there. Lurking. The word came immediately to mind. Church. Ellie cried. Hi, Church. She picked the cat up and hugged it. Lewis watched out of the corner of his eye. His hands, which had been groping on the bottom of the sink for any leftover silverware, were still. He saw Ellie's happy face change slowly to puzzlement. The cat lay quiet in her arms, its ears laid back, its eyes on hers. After a long moment, it seemed very long to Lewis, she peered Church down. The cat padded away toward the dining room without looking back. Executioner of small mice, Lewis thought randomly. Christ, what did we do that night? He tried honestly to remember, but it already seemed far away, dim and distant, like the messy death of Victor Pascal on the floor of the infirmary's reception room. He could remember car in the back field which rose to the woods. That was all. Riages of wind passing in the sky and the white glimmer of snow. What, Ellie? Daddy? Ellie said in a low, subdued voice. Church smells funny, does he? Lewis asked, his voice carefully neutral. Funny before. He smells like caca. Yes, Ellie said, distressed. Yes, he does. He never smelled. Whatever that bad smell is, he'll lose it. Well, maybe he rolled in something bad, honey, Lewis said. Walked off. I certainly bope so, Ellie said in a comical dowager's voice. Lewis found the last fork, washed it, and pulled the plug. He stood at the sink, looking out into the night while the soapy water ran down the drain with a thick chuckling sound. When the sound from the drain was gone, he could hear the wind outside, thin and wild, coming from the north, bringing down winter, and he realized he was afraid, simply, stupidly afraid. The way you are afraid when a cloud suddenly sails across the sun and somewhere you hear a ticking sound you can't account for. 103. Rachel asked, "Jesus, Lou, are you sure? It's a virus," Lewis said. He tried not to let Rachel's voice, which seemed almost accusatory, grate on him. She was tired. It had been a long day for her. She had crossed half the country with her kids today. Here it was 11 o'clock, and the day wasn't over yet. Ellie was deeply asleep in her room. Gage was on their bed in a state that could best be described as semi-conscious. Lewis had started him on Liquipran an hour ago. "The aspirin will bring his fever down by morning, hun. Aren't you going to give him ampicillin or anything?" Patiently, Lewis said, "If he had the flu or a strep infection, I would." "He doesn't. He's got a virus, and that stuff doesn't do doodly squat for viruses. It would just give him the runs and dehydrate him more." "Are you sure it's a virus, guest?" "Well, if you want a second opinion," Lewis snapped, "be my." "You don't have to shout at me." Rachel showered. "I wasn't shouting," Lewis shouted back. "You were," Rachel began, "you were shoo shouting." And then her mouth began to quiver and she put a hand up to her face. Lewis saw there were deep gray-brown pockets under her eyes and felt badly ashamed of himself. "I'm sorry," he said, and sat down beside her. "Christ, I don't know what's the matter with me. I apologize, Rachel." "Never complain, never explain," she said, smiling wanly. "Isn't that what you told me once? The trip was a bitch. And I've been afraid you'd hit the roof when you looked in Gage's dresser drawers. I guess maybe I ought to tell you now, while you're feeling sorry for me. What's to hit the roof about?" She smiled wanly. "My mother and father bought him 10 new outfits. He was wearing one of them today. I noticed he had on something new," he said shortly. "I noticed you noticing," she replied and pulled a comic scowl that made him laugh, although he didn't feel much like laughing. "And 6 new dresses for Ellie." 6 dresses, he said, strangling the urge to yell. He was suddenly furious, sickly furious and hurt in a way he couldn't explain. "Rachel, why? Why did you let him do that? We don't need, we can buy." He ceased. His rage had made him inarticulate, and for a moment he saw himself carrying Ellie's dead cat through the woods, shifting the plastic bag from one hand to the other. And all the while Erwin Goldman, that dirty old fuck from Lake Forest, had been busy trying to buy his daughter's affection by unlimbering the world-famous checkbook and the world-famous fountain pen. For one moment he felt himself on the verge of shouting, "He bought her 6 dresses and I brought her goddamn cat back from the dead, so who loves her more?" He clamped down on the words. He would never say anything like that. Never. She touched his neck gently. "Lewis," she said, "it was both of them together. Please try to see. Please. They love the children, you'd hardly recognize my father. Really. And they don't see them much. And they're getting old." "Lewis, recognize him," Lewis muttered. "Please, honey. Irie to see. Lry to be kind. It doesn't hurt you." He looked at her for a long time. "It does though," he said. Finale. "Maybe it shouldn't, but it does." She opened her mouth to reply, and then Ellie called out from her room, "Daddy. Mommy. Somebody." Rachel started to get up, and Lewis pulled her back down. "Stay with Gage. It'll go." He thought he knew what the trouble was. But he had put the cat out, damn it. After Ellie had gone to bed, he had caught it in the kitchen sniffing around its dish and had put it out. He didn't want the cat sleeping with her. Not anymore. Odd thoughts of disease, mingled with memories of Uncle Carr's funeral parlor, had come to him when he thought of Church sleeping on Ellie's bed. She's going to know that something's wrong and Church was better before. He had put the cat out, but when he went in, Ellie was sitting up in bed, more asleep than awake, and Church was spread out on the counterpane, a bat-like shadow. The cat's eyes were open and stupidly gleaming in the light from the hall. "Daddy, put him out," Ellie almost groaned. He stinks so bad. Shush, Ellie, go to sleep, Louis said, astounded by the calmness of his own voice. It made him think of the morning after his sleepwalking incident, the day after Pascal had died. Getting to the infirmary and ducking into the bathroom to look at himself in the mirror, convinced that he must look like hell. But he had looked pretty much all right. It was enough to make you wonder how many people were going around with dreadful secrets bottled up inside. It's not a secret, goddammit. I's just the cat. But Blee was right. It stank to high heaven. He took the cat out of her room and carried it downstairs, trying to breathe through his mouth. There were worse smells. Shit was worse, if you wanted to be perfectly blunt. A month ago they'd had a go-round with the septic tank, and as Judd had said when he came over to watch Puffer and Sons pump the tank, that ain't Chanel No. 5, is it, Louis? The smell of a gangrenous wound, what old Dr. Bracerman at med school had called hot flesh, was worse too. Even the smell which came from the Civic's catalytic converter when it had been idling in the garage for a while was worse. But this smell was pretty damn bad. And how had the cat gotten in, anyway? He had put it out earlier, sweeping it out with the broom while all three of them, his people, were upstairs. This was the first time he had actually held the cat since the day it had come back, almost a week ago. It lay hotly in his arms, like a quiescent disease, and Louis wondered, "What bowl did you find, you bastard?" He thought suddenly of his dream that other night, Pascal simply passing through the door between the kitchen and the garage. Maybe there was no bolt hole. Maybe it had just passed through the door, like a ghost. "Bag that," he whispered aloud, and his voice was slightly hoarse. Louis became suddenly sure that the cat would begin to struggle in his arms, that it would scratch him. But Church lay totally still, radiating that stupid heat and that dirty stink, looking at Louis's face as if it could read the thoughts going on behind Louis's eyes. He opened the door and tossed the cat out into the garage, something. Maybe a little too hard. "Go on," he said. Kill another mouse or Church landed awkwardly, its hindquarters bunching beneath it and momentarily collapsing. It seemed to shoot Louis a look of green, ugly hate. Then it strolled drunkenly off and was gone. Christ, Judd, he thought, but I wish you'd kept your mouth shut. He went to the sink and washed his hands and forearms vigorously, as if scrubbing for an operation. You do it because it gets bold of you make up reasons. They seem like good reasons. Burley, you do it because once you've been up there, it's your place, and you into it. And you make up the sweetest smelling reasons in the know. He couldn't blame Judd. He had gone of his own free will and he couldn't blame Judd. He burned off the water and began to dry his hands and arms. Suddenly the towel stopped moving and he stared straight ahead, looking out into the little piece of night framed in the window over the sink. Does that mean it's my place now? That it's mine too? No, not if I don't want it to be. He slung the towel over the rack and went upstairs. Rachel was in bed, the covers pulled up to her chin, and Gage was tucked in neatly beside her. She looked at Louis apologetically. Would you mind, hun? Just for tonight? I'd feel better having him with me. He's so bot. No, Louis said. That's fine. I'll put out the hide-a-bed downstairs. You really don't mind? No. It won't hurt Gage, and it'll make you feel better. He paused, then smiled. You're going to pick up his virus, though. That comes almost guaranteed. I don't suppose that changes your mind, does it? She smiled back and shook her head. What was Ellie fussing about? Church. She wanted me to take Church away. Ellie wanted Church taken away? That's a switch. Yeah, it is, Louis agreed and then added, she said he smelled bad, and I did think he was a little fragrant. Maybe he rolled in a pile of someone's mulch, or something. That's too bad, Rachel said, rolling over on her side. I really think Blee missed Church as much as she missed you. The crying was still going on. Katakana middle dot, and the weight was still on his chest. Louis, it was Rachel and she sounded alarmed. Lowe's can you? She sounded more than alarmed. She sounded scared, and the crying had a choked, desperate quality to it. It was Gage. He opened his eyes and stared into Church's greenish-yellow eyes. They were less than 4 inches from his own. The cat was on his chest, neatly curled up there like something from the old wives' tale of breath-stealing. The stink came off it in slow, Knox juice waves. It was purring. Louis uttered a cry of disgust and surprise. He shot both hands in a primitive warding-off gesture. Church thumped off the bed, landed on its side, and walked away in that stumbling lurch. John's. Jess. It was on me. Oh God, it was right on me. His disgust could not be greater if he had awakened to find a spider in his mouth. For a moment he thought he was going to throw up. Lois. He pushed the blankets back and stumbled to the stairs. Faint light spilled from their bedroom. Rachel was standing at the head of the stairs in her nightgown. Louis, he's vomiting again, choking on it. I'm scared. I'm here, he said and came up to her, thinking. It got in. It got in. From the cellar, probably. Maybe there's a broken cellar vidal. In fact, there must be a broken window down there. I'll check it when I get home. Hell, before I go to work. Gage stopped crying and begun to make an ugly, gargling, choking sound. Lois. Rachel screamed. Luce moved fast. Gage was on his side and vomit was trickling out of his mouth onto an old towel Rachel had spread beside him. He was vomiting, yes, but not enough. Most of it was inside, and Gaff was blushing with the onset of asphyxiation. Louis grabbed the boy under the arms, aware in a distant way. How hot his son's armpits were under the Dr. Denton suit, and pet him up on his shoulder as if to burp him. Then Louis snapped him sit backward, jerking Gage with him. Gage's neck whiplashed. He uttered a loud bark that was not quite a belch, and an amazing tag of almost solid vomit flew from his mouth and spattered on the floor in the dresser. Gage began to cry again, a solid, bawling sound that was music to Louis's ears. To cry like that you had to be getting an unlimited supply of oxygen. Rachel's knees buckled and she collapsed onto the bed, head supported in her hands. She was shaking violently. He almost died, didn't he, Louis? He almost ch. Oh my God _ Louis walked around the room with his son in his arms. Gage's cries were tapering off to whimperings. He was already almost asleep again. The chances are 50 to 1 he would have cleared it himself, Rachel. I just gave him a hand. But he was close, she said. She looked up at him, and her white-ringed eyes were stunned and unbelieving. Louis, he was so close. Suddenly he remembered her shouting at him in the sunny kitchen. He's not going to die, no one is going to die around beer. Honey, Louis said, we're all close. All the time. It was milk that had almost surely caused the fresh round of vomiting. Gage had awakened around midnight, she said, an hour or so after Louis had gone to sleep, with his hungry cry, and Rachel had gotten him a bottle. She had drowsed off again herself while he was still taking it. About an hour later, the choking spell began. No more milk, Louis said, and Rachel had agreed, almost humbly. No more milk. Louis got back downstairs at around 1:45 and spent 15 minutes hunting up the cat. During his search, he found the door which communicated between the kitchen and basement standing ajar, as he suspected he would. He remembered his mother telling him about a cat that had gotten quite good at pawing open old-fashioned latches, such as the one on their cellar door. The cat would just climb the edge of the door, Shed said, and pat the thumb plate of the latch with its paw until the door opened. A cute enough trick, Louis thought, but not one he intended to allow Church to practice often. There was, after all, a lock on the cellar door, too. He found Church dozing under the stove and tossed it out the front door without ceremony. On his way back to the high-day bed, he closed the cellar door again. And this time shot the bolt. 29. In the morning, Gage's temperature was almost normal. His cheeks were chapped, but otherwise he was bright-eyed of beans. All at once, in the course of a week it seemed, high almost anything you said. What Ellie wanted him to say was, "Say shit, Gage," Ellie said over her oatmeal. "Shit, Gage," Gage responded agreeably over his own cereal. Luce allowed the cereal on condition that Gage eat it with only a rather than actually eating it. Licked sugar. And, as usual, Gage seemed to be shampooing with it. Ellie dissolved into giggles. "Say farts, Gage," she said. Far Gage, Gage said, grinning through the oatmeal spread across his face. Far's end shit. Ellie and Louis broke up. It was impossible not to. Rachel was not so amused. That's enough vulgar talk for one morning, I think, she said, handing Louis his eggs. Shit and far end shit, Gage sang cheerily, and Ellie hid her giggles in her hands. Rachel's mouth twitched a little, and Louis thought she was looking 100% better in spite of her broken rest. A lot of it was relief, Louis supposed. Gage was better and she was home. Don't say that, Gage, Rachel said. Pretty, Gage said as a change of pace and threw up all the cereal he had eaten into his bowl. Oh, gross out. Ellie screamed and fled the table. Louis broke up completely then. He couldn't help it. He laughed until he was crying and cried until Bea was laughing again. Rachel and Gage stared at him as if he had gone crazy. No, Louis could have told them. I've been crazy, but I think I'm going to be all right now. I really think I am. He didn't know if it was over or not, but it felt over. Perhaps hat would be enough. And for a while, at least, it was. 30. Gage's virus hung on for a week, then cleared up. A week later he came down with a bout of bronchitis. Ellie also caught this and then Rachel. During the period before Christmas, the three of them went around hacking like very old and wheezy hunting dogs. Louis didn't catch it, and Rachel seemed to hold this against him. The final week of classes at the university was a hectic one for Louis, Steve, Surendra, and Charlton. There was no two, at least not yet, but plenty of bronchitis and several cases of mononucleosis and walking pneumonia. 2 days before classes broke for Christmas, 6 moaning, drunken fraternity boys were brought in by their concerned friends. There were a few moments of confusion gruesomely reminiscent of the Pascow affair. All 6 of the damned fools had crammed onto one medium-length toboggan. The 6th had actually been sitting on the shoulders of the tailman, from what Louis could piece together, and had set off to ride the toboggan down the hill above the steam plant. Hilarious. Except that after gaining a lot of speed, the toboggan had wandered off course and struck one of the Civil War cannons. The score was 2 broken arms, a broken wrist, a total of 7 broken ribs, a concussion, plus contusions far too numerous to count. Only the boy riding on the shoulders of the tail ender had escaped completely unscathed. When the toboggan hit the cannon, this fortunate soul flew over it and landed headfirst in snowbank. Cleaning up the human wreckage hadn't been Fu, and Louis had scored all of the boys liberally with his tongue as he stitched and bandaged and stared into pupils, but telling Rachel about it later, he had again laughed until he cried. Rachel had looked at him strangely, not understanding what was so funny, and Louis couldn't tell her that it had been a stupid accident, and one today, Louis. People had been hurt, but they would all walk away from it. His laughter was partly relief, but IR was partly triumph too. 1 The cases of bronchitis in his own family began to clear up around the time that Ellie's school broke for the holidays on December 16, and the 4 of them settled down to spend a happy and old-fashioned country Christmas. The house in North Ludlow, which had seemed so strange on that day in August when they pulled into the driveway, strange and even hostile, what with Ellie cutting herself out back and Gage getting stung by a bee at almost the same time, had never seemed more like home. After the kids were finally asleep on Christmas Eve, Louis and Rachel stole downstairs from the attic like thieves, their arms full of brightly colored boxes, a set of Matchbox racers for Gage, who had recently discovered the joys of toy cars, Barbie and Ken dolls for Ellie, a turn and go, an oversized trike, doll clothes, a play oven with a light bulb inside, other stuff. The 2 of them sat side by side in the glow of lights from the tree, fussing the stuff together. It had lost it all on that night. Louis rarely a Lodheim Todd think about. And Church had lost something else as well. Lots had been aware of it, but it had taken him a full month to pinpoint it exactly. The cat never purred anymore, and it used to have one of the loudest motors going, particularly when Church was sleeping. There had been nights when Louis had had to gear up and close Ellie's door so he could get to sleep himself. Now the cat slept like a stone. Like the dead. No, he reminded himself, there was one exception. The night he had awakened on the high-day bed with Church curled up on his chest like a stinking blanket. Church had been purring that night. It had been making some sound, anyway. But as Judd Crandall had known, or guessed, it had not been all bad. Lewis found a broken window down cellar behind the furnace, and when the glazier fixed it, he had saved them $bucks in wasted heating oil. For calling his attention to the broken pane, which he might not have discovered for weeks months, maybe he supposed he even owed church a vote of thanks. Ellie no longer wanted Church to sleep with her, that was true, but sometimes when she was watching TV, she would let the car hop up on her lap and go to sleep. But just as often, he thought, hunting through the bag of plastic widgets that were supposed to hold Ellie's bat cycle together, she would push him down after a few minutes, saying, "Go on, Church, you stink." She fed him regularly and with love, and even Gage was not above giving Ola Church an occasional tail tug. More in the spirit of friendliness than in one of meanness. Lewis was convinced. He was like a tiny monk yanking a furry bell rope. At these times Church would crawl lackadaisically under one of the radiators where Gage couldn't get him. We might have noticed more differences with a dog, Lewis thought, but cats are such goddamn independent animals anyway, independent and odd. Faye even. It didn't surprise him that the old Egyptian queens and pharaohs had wanted their cats mummified and popped into their triangular tombs with them in order to serve as spirit guides in the next world. Cats were weird. "How you doing with that bat cycle, Chief?" He held out the finished product. Ta-da! Rachel pointed at the bag, which still had 3 or 4 plastic widgets in it. "What are those?" "Spares," Lewis said, smiling guiltily. "You better hope they're spares. The kid will break her rotten little neck." "That comes later," Lewis said maliciously. "When she's 12 and showing off on her new skateboard." She groaned. "Come on, Doc, have a heart." Lewis stood up, put his hands on the small of his back, and twisted his torso. His spine crackled. "That's all the toys. And they're all together. Remember last year?" She giggled and Lewis smiled. Last year seemingly everything they'd gotten had to be assembled, and they'd been up until almost 4 o'clock Christmas morning, both of them finishing grouchy and out of sorts. And by mid-afternoon of Christmas, Ellie had decided the boxes were more fun than the toys. "Gross out," Lewis said, imitating Ellie. "Well, come on to bed," Rachel said, "and I'll give you a present early." "Woman," Lewis said, drawing himself up to his full height, "that is mine by right." "Don't you wish," she said and laughed through her hands. In that moment she looked amazingly like Ellie, and like Gage. "Just a minute," he said. "There's one other thing I gotta do." He hurried into the front hall closet and brought back one of his boots. He removed the fire screen from in front of the dying fire. "Lewis, what are you?" "You'll see." On the left side of the hearth the fire was out and there was a thick bed of fluffy gray ashes. Lewis stamped the boot into them, leaving a deep track. Then he tromped the boot down on the outer bricks, using it like a big rubber stamp. "There," he said, after he had put the boot away in the closet again. "You like?" Rachel was giggling again. "Lewis, Ellie's going to go nuts." During the last 2 weeks of school, Ellie had picked up disquieting rumor around kindergarten, to wit, that Santa Claus was really parents. This idea had been reinforced by a wrathen skinny Santa at the Bangor Mall, whom Ellie had glimpsed in the Deering ice cream parlor a few days ago. Santa had been sitting on a counter stool, his beard pulled to one side so he could eat a cheeseburger. This had troubled Ellie mightily. It seemed to be the cheeseburger, somehow, even more than the false beard, in spite of Rachel's assurances that the department store and Salvation Army Santas were really helpers, sent out by the real Santa, who was far too busy completing inventory and reading children's last-minute letters up north to be boogie-ing around the world on public relations jaunts. Lewis replaced the fire screen carefully. Now there were 2 clear boot tracks in their fireplace, one in the ashes and one on the hearth. They both pointed toward the Christmas tree, as if Santa had hit bottom on one foot and immediately stepped out to leave the goodies assigned to the Creed household. The illusion was perfect unless you happened to notice that they were both left feet, and Lewis doubted if Ellie was that analytical. "Lewis Creed, I love you," Rachel said and kissed him. "You married a winner, baby," Lewis said, smiling sincerely. "Stick with me and I'll make you a star." They started for the stairs. He pointed at the card table Ellie had set up in front of the TV. There were oatmeal cookies and 2 ring dings on it. Also a can of Michelob. For you, Santa, the note said in Ellie's large, stick-like printing. You want a cookie or a ring ding? Ring ding, she said and ate half of it. Louis popped the tab on the beer. A beer this late is going to give me acid indigestion, he said. Crap, she said good-humoredly. Come on, Doc. Louis put down the can of beer and suddenly grasped the pocket of his robe as if he had forgotten something, although he had been aware of that small packet of weight all evening long. Here, he said. For you. You can open it now. It's after midnight. Merry Christmas, babe. She turned the little box, wrapped up in silver paper and tied with wide satiny blue ribbon, in her hands. Louis, what is it? He shrugged. Soap, shampoo sample. I forget, exactly. She opened it on the stores, saw the Tiffany box, and squealed. Mouth slightly agape. She pulled out the cotton batting and then just stood there, her well he asked anxiously. He had never bought her a real piece of jewelry before, and he was nervous. Do you like it? She took it out, draped the fine gold chain over her tented fingers, and held the tiny sapphire to the hall light. It twirled lazily, seeming to shoot off cool blue rays. Oh Louis, it's so damn beautiful. He saw she was crying a little and felt both touched and alarmed. Hey, babe, don't do that, he said. Put it on. We can't afford, you can't afford. Shush, he said. I socked some money away off and on since last Christmas, and it wasn't as much as you might think. How much was it? I'll never tell you that, Rachel, he said solemnly. An army of Chinese torturers couldn't get it out of me. $2,000. 2,000 _. She hugged him so suddenly and so tightly that he almost fell down the stairs. Louis, you're crazy. Put it on, he said again. She did. He helped her with the clasp, and then she turned around to look at him. I want to go up and look at it, she said. I think I want to preen. Preen away, he said. I'll put out the cat and get the lights. When we make it, she said, looking directly into his eyes, I want to take everything off except this. Preen in a hurry, then, Louis said, and she laughed. He grabbed Church and draped it over his arm. He didn't bother much with the broom these days. He supposed that, in spite of everything, he had almost gotten used to the cat again. He went toward the entryway door, turning off lights as he went. When he opened the door communicating between the kitchen and garage, an eddy of cold air swirled around his ankles. Have a Merry Christmas, ch. He broke off. Lying on the welcome mat was a dead crow. Head was mangled. One wing had been ripped off and behind the body like a charred piece of paper. Church immediately squirmed out of Louis's arms and began to nuzzle the frozen corpse eagerly. As Louis watched, the cat's head darted forward, its ears laid back, and before he could turn his bead, Church had ripped out one of the crow's milky, glazed eyes. Church strikes again, Louis thought a little sickly, and turned his head, not however, before he had seen the bloody, gaping socker where the crow's eye had been. So'dn't bother me, shouldn't, Lee seen worse, oh yeah, Pascal, for instance. Pascal was worse, a loss worse, but it did bother him. His stomach turned over. The watt build of sexual excitement had suddenly deflated. Christ, Thai bird's damn near as big as B is. Must Bave caught it with his guard down. Way down. This would have to be cleaned up. Nobody needed this sort of present on Christmas morning. And it was his responsibility, wasn't it? Sure was. His and nobody else's. He had recognized that much in a subconscious way even on the evening of his fam. Eileen's return, when he had purposely spilled the tires over the tattered body of the mouse Church had killed. The soil of a man's heart is stonier, Louis. This thought was so clear, somehow so three-dimensional and auditory, that Louis jerked a little, as if Judd had materialized at his shoulder and spoken aloud. A man grows what he can, and tends it. Church was still hunched greedily over the dead bird. He was working at the other wing now. There was a tenebrous rusting sound as Church pulled it back and forth, back and forth. Never get it off the ground, Orville. That's right, Wilbur, fucking bird's just as dead as dogshit, might as well feed it to the cat, might as well. Louis suddenly kicked Church, kicked him hard. The cat's hindquarters rose and came down splay-footed. It walked Awa, sparing him another of its ugly yellow-green glances. Eat me, Louis hissed at it, cat-like himself. Coming to bed, Louis? Rachel's voice came faintly from their bedroom. Be right there, he called back. I've just got this little mess to clean up, Rachel, okay. Because it's my mess. He tumbled for the switch that controlled the garage light. He went quickly back to the cupboard under the kitchen sink and got a green hefty bag. He cooked the bag back into the garage and took the shovel down from its nail on the garage wall. He scraped up the crow and dropped it into the bag. Then he shoveled up the severed wing and slipped that in. He tied a knot in the top of the bag and dropped it into his ankles were growing numb. The bin on the far side of the Civic. By the time he had finished, Church was standing by the garage doorway. Louis made a threatening gesture at the cat with the shovel, and it was gone like black water. Upstairs Rachel was lying on her bed, wearing nothing but the sapphire on its chain. As promised, she smiled at him lazily. What took you so long, Chief? The light over the sink was out, Louis said. I changed the bulb. Come here, she said and tugged him gently toward her. Not by the hand. He knows if you've been sleeping, she sang softly. A little smile curved up the corners of her lips. He knows if you're awake. Oh my, Louis dear, what's this? Something that just woke up, I think, Louis said, slipping off his robe. Maybe we ought to see if we can get it to sleep before Santa comes, what do you think? She rose on one elbow, he felt her breath, warm and sweet. He knows if you've been bad or good, so be good, for goodness sake. Have you been a good boy, Louis? I think so, he said. His voice was not quite steady. Let's see if you taste as good as you look, she said. The sex was good, but Louis did not find himself simply slipping off afterward as he usually did. When the sex was good, slipping off easy with himself, his wife, his life. He lay in the darkness of Christmas morning, listening to Rachel's breathing slow and deep, and he thought about the dead bird on THT. Doorstepchurch's Christmas present to him. Keep me in mind, Dr. Creed. I was alive and then I was dead and now I'm alive again. I've made the circuit and I'm here to tell you shar you come out the other side with your purr box broken and a taste for the hunt. I'm here to tell you that a man grows what be can and tends it. Don't forget that, Dr. Creed. I'm part of what your heart will grow now. There's your wife and your daughter and your son, and there's me. Remember the secret and tend your garden well. At some point Louis slept. 31. Their winter passed. Ellie's faith in Santa Claus was restored temporarily at least by the footprints in the hearth. Gage opened his present splendidly, pausing every now and then to munch a particularly tasty-looking piece of wrapping paper. And that year, both kids had decided by mid-afternoon that the boxes were more fun than the toys. The Crandalls came over on New Year's Eve for Rachel's eggnog, and Louis found himself mentally examining Norma. She had a pale and somehow transparent look that he had seen before. His grandmother would have said Norma was beginning to foul, and that was perhaps not such a bad word for it. All at once had hands, so swollen and misshapen by arthritis, seemed covered with liver spots. Her hair looked thinner. The Crandalls went home around 10, and the Creeds saw the new year in together in front of the TV. It was the last time Norma was in their house. Most of Louis's semester break was sloppy and rainy. In terms of heating costs, he was grateful for the thaw, but the weather was still depressing and dismal. He worked around the house, building bookshelves and cupboards for his wife, and a model Porsche in his study for himself. By the time classes resumed on January 23rd, Louis was happy to go back to the university. The flu finally arrived. Fairly serious outbreak struck the campus less than a week after the spring semester had begun, and not really unhappy. He had his bands full. He found himself working 10 and some rhymes 12 hours a day and going home utterly whipped. The warm spell broke on January 29th with a roar. There was a blizzard followed by a week of numbing sub-zero weather. Louis was checking the mending broken arm of a young man who was hoping desperately and fruitlessly, in Louis's opinion, that he would be able to play baseball that spring when one of the candy stripers poked her head in and told him his wife was on the telephone. Louis went into his office to take the call. Rachel was crying, and he was instantly alarmed. Billy, he thought. She's fallen off her sled and broken her arm. Or fractured her skull. He thought with alarm of the crazed fraternity boys and their toboggan. It isn't one of the kids, is it? He asked. Rachel? No, no, she said, crying harder. Not one of the kids. It's Norma, Lou, Norma Crandall. She died this morning. Around 8 o'clock, right after breakfast, Judd said. He came over to see if you were here and I told him you'd left half an hour ago. Oh, Lou, he just seemed so lost and so dazed. So old. Thank God Ellie was gone and Gage is too young to understand. Louis's brow furrowed, and in spite of this terrible news he found it was Rachel his mind was going out to, seeking, trying to find. Because here it was again. Nothing you could quite put your finger on, because it was so much an overall attitudinal fix. That death was a secret, a terror, and it was to be kept from the children, above all to be kept from the children, the way that Victorian ladies and gentlemen had believed the nasty, grotty truth about sexual relations must be kept from the children. Jesus, he said. Was it her heart? I don't know, she said. She was no longer crying, but her voice was choked hoarse. Could you come, Louis? You're his Riend, and I think he needs you. You're his friend. Well, I am, Louis thought with a small touch of surprise. I never pecked so have an 80-year-old man for a buddy, but I guess I do. Then it occurred to him that they had better be friends, daring what was between them. And considering that, he supposed that Judd had known they were friends long before Louis had. Judd had stood by him on that one, and in spite of what had happened since, in spite of the mice, in spite of the birds, Louis felt that Judd's decision had probably been the right one. Or, if not the right one, at least the compassionate one. He would do what he could for Judd now, and if it meant being best man at the death of his wife, he would be that. On my way, he said and hung up. 32. It had not been a heart attack. It had been a cerebral accident, sudden and probably painless. When Luce called Masterton that afternoon and told him what was going on, Steve said that he wouldn't mind going out just that way. Sometimes God dillies and dallies, Steve said, and sometimes he just points at you and tells you to hang up your jock. Rachel did not want to talk about it at all and would not allow Louis to talk to her of it. Ellie was not so much upset as she was surprised and interested. It was what Louis thought a thoroughly healthy 6-year-old reaction should be. She wanted to know if Mrs. Crandall had died with her eyes open or shut. Louis said he didn't know. Judd took hold as well as could have been expected, considering the fact that the lady had been sharing bed and board with him for almost 60 years. Louis found the old man, and on this day he looked very much like an old man of 83 sitting alone at the kitchen table, smoking a Chesterfield, drinking a bottle of beer, and staring blankly into the living room. He looked up when Louis came in and said, "Well, she's gone, Louis." He said this in such a clear and matter-of-fact way that Louis thought it must not have really cleared through all the circuits yet hadn't hit him yet where he lived. Then Judd's mouth began to work and he covered his eyes with one arm. Louis went to him and put an arm around him. Judd gave in and wept. It had cleared the circuits, all right. Judd understood perfectly. His wife had died. That's good, Louis said. Thar's good, Judd, she would want. Louis hugged him back. You to cry a little, I think. Probably be pissed off if you did irk. He had started to cry a little himself. Judd hugged him tightly, and Judd cried for 10 minutes or so, and then the storm passed. Louis listened to the things Judd said, then with great care he listened as a doctor as well as a friend. He listened for any circularity in Judd's conversation. He listened to see if Judd's grasp of nothing when was clear. No need to check him on where. That would prove because for Judd Crandall the where had always been Ludlow, Maine. He listened most of all for any use of Normal's name in the present tense. He found little or no sign that Judd was losing his grip. Louis was aware that it was not uncommon for two old married people to go almost hand in hand, a month, a week, even a day apart. The shock, he supposed, or maybe even some deep inner urge to catch up with the one gone. That was a thought he would not have had before church. He found that many of his thoughts concerning the spiritual and the supernatural had undergone a quiet but nonetheless deep sea change. His conclusion was that Judd was grieving hard but that he was still compos mentis. He sensed in Judd none of that transparent frailty that had seemed to surround Norma on New Year's Eve, when the four of them had sat in the Creed living room, drinking eggnog. Judd brought him a beer from the fridge, his face still red and blotchy from crying. "A bit early in the day," he said, "but the sun's over the yardarm somewhere in the world and under the circumstances." Quote closing parenthesis. "Say no more," Lewis told him and opened the beer. He looked at Judd. "Shall we drink to her?" "I guess we better," Judd said. "You should have seen her when she was 16, Lewis, coming back from church with her jacket unbuttoned. Your eyes would have popped. She could have made the devil swear off drinking. Thank Christ she never asked me to do IR." Lewis nodded and raised his beer a little. "To Norma," he said. Judd clinked his bottle against Lewis's. He was crying again, but he was also smiling. He nodded. "May she have peace, and let there be no frigging arthritis wherever she is." "Amen," Lewis said, and they drank. It was the only time Lewis saw Judd progress beyond a meal of tipsiness, and even so he did not become incapacitated. He remained a constant stream of warm memories and anecdotes, colorful and clear and sometimes arresting, flowed from him. Between the stories of the past, Judd dealt with the present in a way Lewis could only admire. If it had been Rachel who had simply dropped dead after her grapefruit and morning cereal, he wondered if he could have done half so well. Judd called the Brookings Smith mortuary in Bangor and made as many of the arrangements as he could by telephone. He made an appointment to come in the following day and make the ret. Yes, he would have her embalmed. He wanted her in a dress, which he would provide. Yes, he would pick out underwear. No, he did not want the mortuary to supply the special shoes which laced up the back. Would they have someone wash her hair? He asked. She washed it last on Monday night, and so it had been dirty when she died. He listened, and Lewis, whose uncle had been in what those in the business called the quiet trade, knew the undertaker was telling Judd that a final wash and set was part of the service rendered. Judd nodded and thanked the man he was talking to, then listened again. Yes, he said, he would have her cosmeticized, but it was to be a lightly applied layer. She's dead and people know it, he said, lighting a Chesterfield. No need to tart her up. The coffin would be closed during the funeral, he told the director with calm authority, but open during the visiting hours the day before. She was to be buried in Mount Hope Cemetery, where they had bought plots in 1951. He had the papers in hand and gave the mortician the plot number so that the preparations could begin out there. H101. He himself had H102, he told Lewis later on. He hung up, looked at Lewis, and said, "Prettiest cemetery in the world is right here in Bangor, as far as I'm concerned. Crack yourself another beer if you want, Lewis. All of this is gonna take away." Lewis was about to refuse. He was feeling a little tittily when a grotesque image arose unbidden behind his eyes. Judd Norma's corpse on a pagan litter through the woods, toward the Micmac burying ground beyond the pet cemetery. It had the effect of a slap on him. Without a word, B got up and got another beer out of the fridge. Judd nodded at him and dialed the telephone again. By 3 that afternoon, when Lewis went home for a sandwich and a bowl of soup, Judd had progressed a long way toward organizing his wife's final rites. He moved from one thing to the next like a man planning a dinner party of some where the actual funeral would take place, and the seminary importance. He called the North Ludlow Methodist Church administration office at Mount Hope. These were both calls the undertaker at Brookings Smith would be making, but Judd called first as a courtesy. It was a step few bereaved ever thought of, or if they thought of it, one they could rarely bring themselves to take. Lewis admired Judd all the more for it. Later he called Norma's few surviving relatives and his own, paging through an old and tattered address book with a leather cover to find the numbers. And between calls, he drank beer and remembered the past. Lewis felt great admiration for him, and love? Yes, his heart confirmed. And love. When Ellie came down that night in her pajamas to be kissed, she asked Lewis if Mrs. Crandall would go to heaven. She almost whispered the question to Lewis, as if she understood it would be better if they were not overheard. Rachel was in the kitchen making a chicken pie, which she intended to take over to Judd the next day. Across the street, all the lights were on in the Crandall house. Cars were parked in Judd's driveway and up and down the shoulder of the highway on that side for 100 feet in either direction. The official viewing hours would be tomorrow, at the mortuary, but tonight people had come to comfort Judd as well as they could, and to help him remember, and to celebrate normal passing, what Judd had referred to once that afternoon as "che foregoing." Between that house and this, a frigid February wind blew. The road was patched with black ice. The coldest part of the Maine winter was now upon them. "Well, I don't really know, honey," Louis said, taking Ellie on his lap. On the TV, a running gunfight was in progress. A man spun and dropped, unremarked upon by either of them. Louis was aware, uncomfortably so, that Ellie probably knew a hell of a lot more aboard Ronald McDonald and Spider-Man in the Burger King than she did about Moses, Jesus, and St. Paul. She was the daughter of a woman who was a non-practicing Jew and a man who was a lapsed Methodist, and he supposed her ideas about the whole spiritus mundi were of the vaguest sort, not myths, not dreams, but dreams of dreams. "It's late for that," he chawed randomly. "She's only 5, but it's late for that. Jesus, it gets late so fast." But Ellie was looking at him, and he ought to say something. "People believe all sorts of things about what happens to us when we die," he said. "Some people think we go to heaven or hell. Some people believe we're born again as little children. Sure, carnation, like what happened to Audrey Rose in that movie on TV. You never saw that. Rachel, he thought, would have her own cerebral accident if she thought Ellie had seen Audrey Rose. Marie told me at school," Ellie said. Marie was Ellie's self-proclaimed best friend, a malnourished, dirty little girl who always looked as if she might be on the edge of impetigo, or ringworm, or perhaps even scurvy. Both Louis and Rachel encouraged the friendship as well as they could, but Rachel had once confessed to Louis that after Marie left, she always felt an urge to check Ellie's head for nits and head lice. Louis had laughed and nodded. "Marie's mommy lets her watch all the shows." There was an implied criticism in this that Louis chose to ignore. "Well, it's reincarnation, but I guess you've got the idea. The Catholics believe in heaven and hell, but they also believe there's a place called limbo and one called purgatory. And the Hindus and Buddhists believe in nirvana." There was a shadow on the dining room wall. "Rachel, Lee Tenning." Louis went on more slowly. "There are probably lots more too. But what it comes down to, Blay, is this: no one knows. People say they know, but when they say that, what they mean is that they believe because of faith. Do you know what faith is?" "Well, here we are, sitting in my chair," Louis said. "Do you think my chair will still be here tomorrow?" "Yeah, sure. Then you have faith it will be here. As it so happens, I do, too. Faith is believing a thing will be, or is. Get it?" "Yes," Ellie nodded positively. "But we don't know it'll be here. After all, some crazed chair burglar might break in and take it, right?" Ellie giggled. Louis smiled. "We just have faith that won't happen. Faith is a great thing, and really religious people would like us to believe that faith and knowing are the same thing, but I don't believe that myself. Because there are too many different ideas on the subject. What we know is this: when we die, one of two things happens. Either our souls and thoughts somehow survive the experience of dying or they don't. If they do, that opens up every possibility you could think of. If we don't, it's just blotto. The end, like going to sleep?" He considered this and then said, "More like having ether, one. Think, which do you have faith in, Daddy?" The shadow on the wall moved and came to rest again. For most of his adult life since college days, he supposed he had believed that death was the end. He had been present at many deathbeds and had never felt a soul bullet past him on its way to wherever. Hadn't this very thought occurred to him upon the death of Victor Pascal? He had agreed with his psychology teacher that the life after death experiences reported in scholarly journals and then vulgarized in the popular press prob. There was a shadow on the dining room wall. "Rachel, Lee Tenning." Louis went on more slowly. "There are probably lots more too. But what it comes down to, Blay, is this: no one knows. People say they know, but when they say that, what they mean is that they believe because of faith. Do you know what faith is?" "Well, Here we are, sitting in my chair, Louis said. Do you think my chair will still be here tomorrow? Yeah, sure. Then you have faith it will be here. As it so happens, I do, too. Faith is believing a thing will be, or is. Get it? Yes, Ellie nodded positively. But we don't know it'll be here. After all, some crazed chair burglar might break in and take it, right? Ellie giggled. Louis smiled. We just have faith that won't happen. Faith is a great thing, and really religious people would like us to believe that faith and knowing are the same thing, but I don't believe that myself. Because there are too many different ideas on the subject. What we know is this. When we die, one of two things happens. Either our souls and thoughts somehow survive the experience of dying or they don't. If they do, that opens up every possibility you could think of. If we don't, it's just blotto. The end, like going to sleep? He considered this and then said, more like having ether. 1. Think. Which do you have faith in, Daddy? The shadow on the wall moved and came to rest again. For most of his adult life since college days, he supposed he had believed that death was the end. He had been present at many deathbeds and had never felt a soul bullet past him on its way to wherever. Hadn't this very thought occurred to him upon the death of Victor Pascal? He had agreed with his psychology teacher that the life after death experiences reported in scholarly journals and then vulgarized in the popular press ably indicate an last-ditch mental stand against the onrush of death, the endlessly inventive human mind, staving off insanity to the very end by constructing a hallucination of immortality. He had likewise agreed with an acquaintance in the dorm who had said, during an all-night bull session during Lewis's sophomore year at Chicago, that the Bible was suspiciously full of miracles which had ceased almost completely during the age of rationality, totally ceased, he had said at first, but had been forced backward at least one step by others who claimed with some authority that there were still plenty of weird things going on, little pockets of perplexity in a world that had become by and large a clean, well-lighted place. Cher was, for instance, the Shroud of Turin, which had survived every effort to debunk it. So Christ brought Lazarus back from the dead, this acquaintance, who had gone on to become a highly thought of O.B. man in Dearborn, Michigan, had said. That's fine with me. If I have to swallow it, I will. I mean, I had to buy the concept that the fetus of one twin can sometimes swallow the fetus of the other in utero, like some kind of unborn cannibal, and then show up with teeth in his testes or in his lungs 20 or 30 years later to prove that he did it. And I suppose if I can buy that, I can buy anything. But I want to see the death certificate. You dig what I'm saying? I'm not questioning that he came out of the tomb, but I want to see the original death certificate. I'm like Thomas saying he'd only believe Jesus had risen when he could look through the nail holes and stick his hands in the guy's side. As far as I'm concerned, B was the real physician of the bunch, not Luke. No, he had never really believed in survival. At least, not until church. I believe that we go on, he told his daughter slowly. But as to what it's like, I have no opinion. It may be that it's different for different people. It may be that you get what you believed all your life. But I believe we go on, and I believe that Mrs. Crandall is probably someplace where she can be happy. You have faith in that, Ellie said. It was not a question. She sounded odd. Louis smiled, a little pleased and a little embarrassed. I supped 10 minutes ago. Pose so. And I have faith that it's time for you to go to bed. Like he kissed her twice, once on the lips and once on the nose. Do you think animals go on? Yes, he said, without thinking, and for a moment and his skin felt gray and cold. Added, especially cats. The words had actually trembled on his lips. Okay, she said and slid down. Gotta go kiss mommy. Right on. He watched her go. At the dining room doorway, she turned back and said, I was really silly about church that day, wasn't I? Crying like that. No, hun, he said. I don't think you were silly. If he died now, I could take it, she said, and then seemed to consider the thought she had just spoken aloud, as if mildly startled. Then she said, as if agreeing with herself, sure I could. And went to find Rachel. Later in bed, Rachel said, I heard what you were talking about with her. And you don't approve? Louis asked. He had decided that maybe it would be best to have this out, if that was what Rachel wanted. No, Rachel said, with a hesitance that was not much like her. No, Louis, it's not like that. I just get scared. And you know me. When I get scared, I get defensive. Louis could not remember ever hearing Rachel speak with such effort, and suddenly he felt more cautious than he had with Ellie earlier. He felt that he was in a minefield. Scared of what? Dying? Not myself, she said. I hardly even think of Thar anymore. But when I was a kid, I thought of it a lot. Lost the lure of sleep. Dreamed of monsters coming to carve me up in my bed, and all of the monsters looked like my sister Zelda. Yes, Louis thought, here it is, at last, after all the time we've been married, here it is. You don't talk about her much, he said. Never talk about her. I try never to think about her. Rachel smiled and touched his face. You're sweet, Lois. I always assumed you had your reasons. I did. I do. She paused, thinking. I know she died. Spinal meningitis. In the house anymore. Spinal meningitis, she repeated. There are no pictures of her. There's a picture of a young girl in your father's. In his study. Yes, I forgot that one. And my mother carries one in her wallet still, I think. She was 2 years older than I was. She caught it, and she was in the back bedroom. She was in the back bedroom like a dirty secret. Louis, she was dying in there. My sister died in the back bedroom, and that's what she was, a dirty secret. She was always a dirty secret. Rachel suddenly broke down completely, and in the loud, rising quality of her sobs, Louis sensed the onset of hysteria and became alarmed. He reached for her and caught a shoulder, which was pulled away from him as soon as he touched it. He could feel the whisper of her nightdress under his fingertips. Rachel, babe, don't tell me, don't, she said. Don't stop me, Louis. I've only got the strength to tell this once, and then I don't want to ever talk about it again. I probably won't sleep tonight as it is. Was it that horrible? He asked, knowing the answer already. It explained so much, and even things he had never connected before or only suspected vaguely suddenly came together in his mind. She had never attended a funeral with him, he realized, not even that of Al Locke, a fellow med student who had been killed when his motorcycle had collided with a city bus. Al had been a regular visitor at their apartment, and Rachel had always liked him. Yet she had not gone to his funeral. She was sick that day, Louis remembered suddenly. Get the Louis something. Looked serious. But the next day she was okay again. After the funeral SBE was all right again, he correct himself. He psychosomatic. Remembered thinking even then that her sickness might just be. It was horrible, all right. Worse than you can ever imagine. Louis, we watched her degenerate day by day, and there was nothing anyone could do. She was in constant pain. Her body seemed to shrivel, pull in on itself. Her shoulders hunched up and her face pulled down until it was like a mask. Her hands were like birds' feet. I had to feed her sometimes. I hated it, but one did it and never said boo about it. When the pain got bad enough, they started giving her drugs. Mild ones at first and then ones that would have left her a junkie if she had lived. But of course everyone knew she wasn't going to live. I guess that's why she's such a secret to all of us. Because we wanted her to die, Louis, we wished for her to die, and it wasn't just so she wouldn't feel any more pain, it was so we wouldn't feel any more pain, it was because she was starting to look like a monster. And she was starting to be a monster. Oh Christ, I know how awful that must sound. She put her face in her hands. Louis touched her gently. Rachel, it doesn't sound awful at all. It does. She cried. It does. It just sounds true, he said. Victims of long illnesses often become demanding, unpleasant monsters. The idea of the saint-like, long-suffering patient is a big romantic fiction. By the time the first set of sores crops up on a bed-bound patient's butt, he or she has started to snipe and cut and spread the misery. They can't help it, but that doesn't help the people in the situation. She looked at him, amazed, almost hopeful. Then distrust stole back into her face. You're making that up. He smiled grimly. Want me to show you the textbooks? How about the suicide statistics? Want to see those? In families where a terminal patient has been nursed at home, the suicide statistics spike right up into the stratosphere in the 6 months following the patient's death. Suicide. They swallow pills, or sniff a pipe, or blow their brains out. Their hair, their weariness, their disgust, their row. He shrugged and brought his closed fists gently together. The survivors start feeling as if they'd committed murder. So they step out. A crazy, wounded kind of relief had crept into Rachel's puffy face. She was demanding, hateful. Sometimes she'd piss in her bed deliberately. My mother would ask her if she wanted help getting to the bathroom, and later, when she couldn't get up anymore, if she wanted the bedpan. And Zelda would say no. And then she'd piss the bed so my mother and I would have to change the sheets. And she'd say it was an accident, but you could see the smile in her eyes, Louis. You could see it. The room always smelled of piss and her drugs. She had bottles of some dope that smelled like Smith Brothers Wild Cherry cough drops, and that smell was always there. Some nights I wake up. Even now I wake up and I think I can smell Wild Cherry cough drops. And I think, if I'm not really awake, I think, is Zelda dead yet? Is she? I think. Rachel caught her breath. Louis took her hand and she squeezed his fingers with savage, brilliant tightness. When we changed her, you could see the way her back was twisting and nodding. Near the end, Louis, near the end it seemed like her ass had somehow gotten all the way up to the middle of her back. Now Rachel's eyes had taken on the glassy, horrified look of a child remembering a recurrent nightmare of terrible power. And sometimes she'd touch me with her hands, her birdie hands. And sometimes I'd almost scream and ask her not to. And once I spilled some of her soup on my arm when she touched my face and I burned myself, and that time I did scream. And I cried and I could see the smile in her eyes then, too. Near the end the drugs stopped working. She was the one who would scream then, and none of us could remember the way she was before, not even my mother. She was just this foul, hateful, screaming thing in the back bedroom, our dirty secret. In her distressed, total recall of that day, she did a more than creditable imitation of the way her sister Zelda must have sounded, and Louis's mind flashed to Victor Pascal. His grip as his wife tightened, and there was spit coming down her chin. Rachel, that's enough, he said, not quite steadily. I am aware of the symptoms. I'm explaining, she said stubbornly. I am explaining why I can't go to poor Norma's funeral, for one thing. And why we had that stupid fight that day. Shush, that's forgotten. Not by me, it isn't, she said. I remember it well, Louis. I remember it as well as I remember my sister Zelda choking to death in her bed on April 14, 1965. For a long moment there was silence in the room. I turned her over on her belly and thumped her back. Rachel went on at last. It's all I knew to do. Her feet were beating up and down, and her twisted legs. And I remember there was a sound like farting. I thought she was farting or I was, but it wasn't farts, it was the seams under both arms of my blouse ripping out when I turned her over. She started to convulse, and I saw that her face was turned sideways, turned into the pillows, and I thought, oh, she's choking? Zelda's choking, and they'll come home and say I murdered her by choking, they'll say you hated beer, Rachel, and that was true, and they say you wanted beer to be dead. And that was true too. Because Louis, see, the first thought that went through my mind when she started to go up and down in the bed like that, one remember it, my first thought was oh good, finally, Zelda's choking and this is going to be over. So I turned her over again and her face had gone black, Louis, and her eyes were bulging and her neck was swelled up. Then she died. I backed across the room. I guess I wanted to back out the door, but I hit the wall and a picture fell down. It was a picture from one of the Oz books Zelda liked before she got sick with the meningitis. When she was well, it was a picture of Oz the Great and Terrible. Only Zelda always called him Oz the Guare and Tuwibble because she couldn't make that sound, and so she sounded like Elmer Fudd. My mother got that picture framed because Zelda liked it most of all. Oz the Gweet and Tuwibble. And it fell down and hit the floor and the glass in the frame shattered and I started to scream because I knew she was dead and I thought it was her ghost, coming back to get me, and I knew that her ghost would hate me but her ghost wouldn't be stuck in bed, so I screamed. I screamed and I ran out of the house screaming. Zelda's dead, Zelda's dead, Zelda's dead, and the neighbors, They came and they looked. They saw me running down the street with my blouse all ripped out under the arms. I was yelling, Zelda's dead. Louts, and I guess maybe they thought I was crying, but I think maybe I was laughing, Louis. I think maybe that's what I was doing. If you were, I salute you for it, Louis said. You don't mean that, though, Rachel said with the utter surety of one who has been over a point and over it and over it. He let it go. He thought she might eventually get rid of this awful, rancid memory that had haunted her for so long, most of it, anyway, but never this part. Never completely. Louis Creed was no psychiatrist, but he knew that there are rusty, half-buried things in the terrain of any life and that human beings seem compelled to go back to these things and pull at them, even though they cut. Tonight Rachel had pulled almost all of it out, like some grotesque and stinking rotten tooth, its crown black, its nerves infected, its roots fetid. It was out. Let that last noxious cell remain. If God was good, it would remain dormant except in her deepest dreams. That she had been able to remove as much as she had was well nigh incredible. It did not just speak of her courage, it clarioned it. Louis was in awe of her. He felt like cheering. He sat up now and turned on the light. Yes, he said, I salute you for it. And if I needed another reason to really dislike your mother and father, I've got it now. You never should have been left alone with her, Rachel. Never. Like a child, child of 8 she had been when this dirty, incredible thing had happened. She reprimanded him. Lou, it was Passover season. I don't care if it was Judgment Trump, Louis said with a sudden low and hoarse savagery that caused her to pull back a little. He was remembering the student nurses, those 2 candy stripers whose evil luck it had been to be in attendance on the morning Pascal had been brought in dying. One of them, a tough little lady named Carla Shavers, had returned the next day and had worked out so well that even Charlton was impressed. The other they had never seen again. Louis was not surprised and did not blame her. Where was the nurse? There should have been an RN in attendance. They went out. They actually went out and left an 8-year-old kid in charge of Beer dying sister, who was probably clinically insane by then. Why? Because it was Passover season. And because elegant Dory Goldman couldn't stand the stink that particular morning and had to get away from it for just a little while. So Rachel got the duty. Right, friends and neighbors? Rachel got the duty. 8 years old, pigtails, midi blouse. Rachel got the duty. Rachel could stay and put up with the stink. What did they send Beer to Camp Sunset in Vermont for 6 weeks every year, if not to put up with the stink of her dying, insane sister? 10 new shirt and jumper combinations for Gage and 6 new dresses for Ellie, and I'll pay your way through medical school if you'll stay away from my daughter. But where was the overflowing checkbook when your daughter was dying of spinal meningitis and your other daughter was alone with Beer, you bastard? Where was the R-fucking-N? Louis sat up, got out of bed. Where are you going? Rachel asked, alarmed. To get you a Valium. You know I don't. Tonight you do, he said. She took the pill and then told him the rest. Her voice remained calm throughout. The tranquilizer was doing its job. Me next door neighbor had retrieved 8-year-old Rachel from behind a tree where she was crouching and screaming. Zelda's dead. Over and over. Rachel's nose had been bleeding. She had blood all over her. He same neighbor had called the ambulance and then her parents, after getting Rachel's nosebleed stopped and calming her with a cup of hot tea and 2 aspirins. She was able to get the location of her parents out of her. They were visiting Mr. and Mrs. Cabron across town. Peter Cabron was an accountant in her father's business. By that evening, great changes had taken place in the Goldman household. Zelda was gone. Her room had been cleaned and fumigated. All of the furniture was gone. The room was a bare box. Later, much later, it had become Dory Goldman sewing. Dude, the first of the nightmares had come to Rachel that night. And when Rachel woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning, screaming for her mother, she had been horrified to discover that she could barely get out of bed. Her back was in agony. She had strained at moving Zelda. In her spurt of adrenaline-powered strength, she had, after all, lifted Zelda with enough force to pull her own blouse apart. That she had strained herself trying to keep Zelda from choking was simple, obvious, elementary, my dear Watson. To everyone, that was, except Rachel herself. Rachel had been sure that this was Zelda's revenge from beyond the grave. Zelda knew that Rachel was glad she was dead. Zelda knew that when Rachel burst from the house telling all and sundry Zelda's dead at the top of her voice, she had been laughing, not screaming. Zelda knew she had been murdered and so had given Rachel spinal meningitis, and soon Rachel's back would start to twist and change and she too would have to lie in bed, slowly but surely turning into a monster, her hands hooking into claws. After a while she would begin screaming with the pain, as Zelda had done, and then she would start wetting the bed, and finally she would choke to death on her own tongue. It was Zelda's revenge. No one could talk Rachel out of this belief, not her mother, her father, or Dr. Murray, who diagnosed a mild back sprain and then told Rachel brusquely, cruelly. Some Lewis, for instance, would have said to stop behaving so badly. She ought to remember that her sister had just died, Dr. Murray told her. Her parents were prostrate with grief and this was not the time for Rachel to make a childish play for attention. Only the slowly abating pra had been able to convince her that she was neither the victim of Zelda's supernatural vengeance nor God's just punishment of the wicked. For months or so she told Lewis, it had actually been years, 8 of them, afterward she would awaken from nightmares in which her sister died over and over again, and in dark Rachel's hands would fly to her back to make sure it was all right. In the frightful aftermath of these dreams she often thought that the closet door would bang open and Zeld would lurch out, blue and twisted, her eyes rolled up to shiny whites, het black tongue puffing out through her lips, her hands hooked into claws to murder the murderer cowering in her bed which her bands jammed into the small of her back. She had not attended Zelda's funeral or any funeral since. If you'd told me this before, Lewis said, it would have explained a hell of a lot. Lou, I couldn't, she said simply. She sounded very sleepy now. Since then I've been, I guess, a little phobic on the subject. Just a little phobic, Lewis thought. Yeah, right. I can't seem to help it. In my mind I know you're right, that death is perfectly natural good, even but what my mind knows and what happens inside me. Yeah, he said. That day I blew up at you, she said. I knew that Ellie was just crying over the idea. A way of getting used to it, but couldn't help it. I'm sorry, Lewis. No apology needed, he said, stroking her hair. But whatcha hell, I accept it anyway, if it'll make you feel better. She smiled. It does, you know. And I feel better. I feel as if Elle just sicked up something that's poisoned part of me for years. Maybe you have. Rachel's eyes slipped closed and then opened again, slowly. And don't blame it all on my father, Lewis. Please. That was terrible time for them. Zelda's bills were sky high. My dad had missed his chance to expand into the suburbs, and mother was half crazy herself. The sales in the downtown store were off. On top of that, well, it all worked out. It was as if Zelda's death was the signal for good times to come around again. There had been a restless scion, but then the money loosened up and Daddy got his loan, and since then he's never looked back. But that's why they've always been possessive of me, I think. It's not just because I am the only one left. Tease guilt, Lewis said. Yes, I suppose. And you won't be mad at me if I'm sick when they bury Norma? No, honey, I won't be mad. He paused and then took her hand. May I take Ellie? Her hand tightened in his. Oh, Lewis, I don't know, she said. She's so young. She's known where babies come from for a year or more, he reminded her again. She was quiet for a long time, looking up at the ceiling and biting her lips. If you think it's best, she said finally. If you think it won't hurt her. Come over here, Rachel, he said, and that night they slept back to stomach in Lewis's bed, and when she woke up trembling in the middle of the night, the Valium worn off, he soothed her with his hands and whispered in her ear that everything was okay, and she slept again. 33. For man, and woman, is like the flowers in the valley, which bloom today and are tomorrow cast into the oven. The time of man is but a season, and so it passeth away. Let us pray. Billy, resplendent in a navy blue dress bought especially for the occasion, dropped her head so abruptly that Lewis, sitting next to her in the pew, heard her neck creak. Ellie had been in few churches, and of course it was her first funeral. The combination had awed her to unaccustomed silence. For Luce, it had been a rare occasion with his daughter. Mo, blinded by his love for her, as he was by his love for Gage, B rarely observed her in a detached way. But today he thought B was seeing what was almost a textbook case of the child NEA, the end of life's first great developmental stage. An organism almost pure curiosity, storing up information madly in all-run endless circuits. Ellie had been quiet even when Judd, Lucas strange but elegant in his black suit and lace-up shoes, Laxey believed it was the first time he had ever seen him in anything BR loaders or green rubber boots, had bent over, kissed her, and said, "Glad you could come, honey. And I bet Norma is too." Ellie had gazed at him, wide-eyed. Now the Methodist minister, Reverend Laughlin, was pronouncing the benediction, asking God to lift up his countenance upon them and give them peace. "Will the pallbearers come forward?" he asked. Lewis started to rise, and Ellie halted him, tugging his arm frantically. She looked scared. "Daddy," she stage whispered. "Where are you going?" "I'm one of the pallbearers, honey," Lewis said, sitting down beside her again for a moment and putting an arm around her shoulders. "That means I'm going to help carry Norma out. There are 4 of us that are going to do it, me and 2 of Judd's nephews and Norma's brother." "Where will I find you?" Lewis glanced down front. The other 3 pallbearers assembled there, along with Judd. The rest of the congregatio was filing out, some of them weeping. "If you just go out on the steps, I'll meet you there," he sighed. "All right, Ellie?" "Yes," she said. "Just don't forget me." "No, I won't." He got up again, and she tugged his hand again. "Daddy?" "What, babe? Don't drop her," Ellie whispered. Lewis joined the others, and Judd introduced him to the nephews, who were really second or third cousins, descendants of Judd's father's brother. They were big fellows in their 20s with a strong facial resemblance. Norma's brother was somewhere in his late 50s, Luce guessed, and while the strain of a death in the family was on his face, he seemed to be bearing up well. Affordable and outsider in the family circle. "Pleased to meet you all," Lewis said. He felt a trifle uncalm. They nodded at him. In the vestibule, watching. "Ellie okay?" Judd asked and nodded to her. "She was lingering. Sure, she just wants to make sure I don't go up in a puff of smoke," Lewis thought and almost smiled. But then that thought called up another one. Oz the Gweet and terrible, and the smile died. "Yes, I think so," Lewis said and raised a hand to her. She raised hers in return and went outside then in a swirl of navy blue dress. For a moment Lewis was uneasily struck by how adult she looked. It was the sort of illusion, no matter how fleeting, that could give a man pause. "You guys ready?" one of the nephews asked. Lewis nodded. So did Norma's younger brother. "Take it easy with her," Judd said. His voice had roughened. Then he turned away and walked slowly up the aisle with his head down. Lewis moved to the back left corner of the steel-gray American Beaternal coffin Judd had chosen for his wife. He laid hold of his runner and the 4 of them slowly carried Norma's coffin out into the bright still cold February 1st. Someone the church custodian, he supposed, had laid down a good bed of cinders over the slippery path of damp snow. At the curb a Cadillac hearse idled white exhaust into the winter air. The funeral director and his husky son stood beside it, watching them, ready to lend a hand if anyone, her brother, perhaps, should slip or flag. Judd stood beside him and watched as they slid the coffin inside. "Goodbye, Norma," he said and lit a cigarette. "Till see you in a while, old girl." Lewis slipped an arm around Judd's shoulders, and Noam's brother stood close by on his other side, crowding Che Mauritian and his son into the background. The burly nephews, or second cousins, or whatever they were, had already done a fade, the sim-ple job of lifting and carrying done. They had grown distant from this part of the family. They had known the woman's face from photographs and a few duty visits, perhaps long afternoons spent in the parlor eating Norma's cookies and drinking Judd's beer, perhaps not really minding the old scories of times they had not lived through and people they had not known, but aware of things they could have been doing all the same, a cat that could have been washed and turtle waxed, a league bowling practice, maybe just sitting around the TV and watching a boxing match with some friends, and glad to be away when the duty was done. Judd's part of the family was in the past now, as far as they were concerned. It was like an eroded planetoid drifting away from the main mass, dwindling, little more than a speck. The past, pictures in an album, old stories told in rooms that perhaps seemed too hot to them. They were not old. There was no arthritis in their oints. Their blood had not thinned. The past was runners to be gripped and hefted and later let go. After all, if the human body was an envelope to hold the human soul, God's letters to the universes most churches taught, then the American eternal coffin was an envelope to hold the human body. And to these husky young cousins or nephews or whatever they were, the past was just a dead letter to be filed away. God save the past, Lewis thought, and shivered for no good reason other than that the day would come when he would be every bit unfamiliar to his own blood, his own grandchildren, if Ellie or Gage produced kids and he lived to see them. The focus shifted, family lines degenerated, young faces looking out of old photographs. God save the past, he thought again and tightened his grip around the old man's shoulders. The ushers put the flowers into the back of the hearse. The electric rear window rose and thumped home in its socket. Lewis went back to where his daughter was, and they walked to the Santa Tion wagon together, Lewis holding Ellie's arm so she wouldn't slip in her good shoes with the leather soles. Car engines were. Why are they putting on their lights, Daddy? Elle asked Sile of the day, with mild wonder. Why are they putting on their lights in the they do it? Lewis began and heard the thickness in his own, to honor the dead, Ellie. He pulled out the knob that met on the wagon's headlights. Come on. They were going home at last, the graveside ceremony over. Actually, it was held at the small Mount Hope Chapel. No grave would be dug for Norma until spring, when Ellie suddenly burst into tears. Lewis glanced at her, surprised but not particularly alarmed. Ellie, what is it? No more cookies, Ellie sobbed. She made the best oatmeal cookies I ever ate. But she won't make them anymore because she's dead. Daddy, why do people have to be dead? I don't really know, Lewis said. To make room for all the new people, I guess. Little people like you and your brother Gage. I'm never going to get married or do sex and have babies. Ellie declared, crying harder than ever. Then maybe it'll never happen to me. It's awful. It's mean. But it's an end to suffering, Lewis said quietly. And as a doctor I see a lot of suffering. One of the reasons I wanted the job at the university was because I got sick of looking at it day in and day out. Young people quite often have pain. Bad pain, even. But that's not quite the same as suffering. He paused. Believe it or not, honey, when people get very old, death doesn't always look so bad or so scary as it seems to you. And you have years and years and years ahead of you. Ellie cried, and then she sniffed, and then she stopped. Before they got home, she asked if she could play the radio. Lewis said yes, and she found Shakin' Stevens singing, This Old House, on WACZ. Soon she was singing along. When they got home she went to her mother and prattled about the funeral. To Rachel. Credit, she listened quietly, sympathetically, and supportively. Although Lewis thought she looked pale and thoughtful. Then Ellie asked her if she knew how to make oatmeal cookies, and Rachel put away the piece of knitting she'd been doing in it. Yes, she said. Want to make a batch? Rose at once, as if she had been waiting for this or something like. Yay, Ellie shouted. Can we really, Mom? We can if your father will watch Gage for an hour. I'll watch him, Lewis said. With pleasure. Lewis spent the evening reading and making notes on a long article in the Duquesne Medical Digest. The old controversy concerning dissolving sutures had begun again. In the small world of those relatively few humans on Earth concerned with sterching minor wounds, it appeared to be as endless as that old psycholic squabbling point, nature versus nurture. He intended writing a dissenting letter this very night, proving that the writer's main contentions were specious, his case examples self-serving, his research almost criminally sloppy. In short, Lewis was looking forward, with high good humor, to blowing the stupid fuck right off the map. He was hunting around in the study bookcase for his copy of Troutman's Treatment of Wounds when Rachel came halfway down the stairs. Coming up, Lewis? I'll be a while. He glanced up at her. Everything all right? They're deep asleep, both of them. Lewis looked at her closely. Them, yeah. You're not. I'm fine. Been reading. You're okay? Really? Yes, she said and smiled. I love you, Louis. Love you too, babe. He glanced at the bookcase, and there was Troutman, right where he had been all along. Louis Pure, he hand on the textbook. Church brought a rat into the house while you and Ellie were gone, she said and tried to smile. Yuck, what a mess. Geez, Rachel, I'm sorry. He hoped he did not sound as guilty as, at the moment, he felt. It was bad? Rachel sat down on the stairs. In her pink flannel nightgown, her face cleaned of makeup and her forehead shining, her hair tied back into a short ponytail with a rubber band, she looked like a child. I took care of it, she said, but do you know, I had to beat that dumb cat out the door with the vacuum cleaner attachment before it would stop guarding the corpse. It growled at me. Lately, Church never growled at me before in his life. 34. Ellie turned 6. She came home from kindergarten on her birthday with a paper hat askew on her head, several pictures friends had drawn of her. In the best of them Ellie looked like a friendly scarecrow, and baleful stories about spankings in the schoolyard during recess. The flu epidemic passed, they had to send 2 students to the EMMC in Bangor, and Surendra Hardu probably saved the life of one woefully sick freshman boy with the terrible name of Peter Humperton, who went into convulsions shortly after being admitted. Rachel developed a mild infatuation with the blonde bag boy at the A&P in Brewer and rhapsodized to Louis at night about how packed his jeans looked. It's probably just toilet paper, she added. Squeeze it sometime, Louis suggested. If he screams, it's probably not. Rachel had laughed until she cried. The blue, still, sub-zero mini-season of February passed and brought on the alternating rains and freezes of March, potholes, and those orange roadside signs which pay homage to the great god Bump. The immediate, personal, and most agonizing grief of Judd Crandall passed, that grief which the psychologists say begins about 3 days after the death of a loved one and holds hard from 4 to 6 weeks in most cases. Like that period of time New Englanders sometimes call deep winter. But time passes, and time welds one state of human feeling into another until they become something like a rainbow. Strong grief becomes a softer, more mellow grief. Mellow grief become mourning. Mourning at last becomes remembrance. A process that may take from 6 months to 3 years and still be considered normal. The day of Gage's first haircut came and passed, and when Louis saw his son's hair growing in darker, he joked a bore and did his own mourning but only in his heart. Spring came, and it stayed a while. 35 Louis Creed came to believe that the last really happy day of life was March 24, 1984. The things that were to come, poised above them like a killing sachwait, were still over 7 weeks in the future, but looking over those 7 weeks he found nothing which stood out with the same color. He supposed that even if none of those terrible things had happened, he would have remembered the day forever. Days which seemed genuinely good. Good all the way through or rare enough anyway, he thought. It might be that there was less than a month of really good ones in any natural man's life in the best of circumstances. It came to seem to Louis that God, in his infinite wisdom, seemed much more generous when it came to doling out pain. That day was a Saturday, and he was home minding Gage in the afternoon while Rachel and Ellie went after groceries. They had gone with Judd in his old and rattling 59IH pickup not because the station wagon wasn't running but because the old man genuinely liked their company. Rachel asked Louis if he would be okay with Gage, and he told her that of course he would. He was glad to see her get out. After a winter in Maine, most of it in Ludlow, he thought that she needed all the getting out she could lay her hands on. She had been an unremittingly good sport about it, but she did seem to him to be getting a little stir-crazy. Gage got up from his nap around 2 o'clock, scratchy and out of sorts. He had discovered the terrible Ewos and made them his own. Louis tried several ineffectual gambits to amuse the kid, and Gage turned them all down. To make matters worse, the rotten kid had an enormous bowel movement, the artistic quality of which was not improved for Louis when he saw a blue marble sitting in the middle of it. It was one of Ellie's marbles. The kid could have choked. He decided the marbles were going to go. Everything Gage got hold of went right to his mouth, but that decision, while undoubtedly laudable, didn't do a thing about keeping the kid amused until Biff's mother got back. Louis listened to the early spring wind gust around the house, sending big blinkers of light and shadow across Mrs. Vinton's field next door, and he suddenly thought of the vulture he had bought on a whim 5 or 6 weeks before, while on his way home from the university. Had he bought twine as well? He had, by God. Gage, he said. Gage had found a green Crayola under the couch and was currently scribbling in one of Ellie's favorite books something else to feed the fires of sibling rivalry. Lowen thought and grinned. If Ellie got really pissy about the scribble Gage had managed to put in where the wild things are before Lewis could get it away from him, Lewis would simply mention the unique treasure he had uncovered in Gage's Pampers. What? Gage responded smartly. He was talking pretty well now. Lewis had decided the kid might actually be half bright. You wanna go out? Wanna go out? Gage agreed excitedly. Wanna go where my neeks, daddy? This sentence, if reproduced phonetically, would have looked something like this. Way mon neeks, dab dee. The translation was where are my sneakers, father? Lewis was often struck by Gage's speech, not because it was cute, but because he thought that small children all sounded like immigrants learning a foreign language in some helter-skelter but fairly amiable way. He knew that babies make all the sounds the human voice box is capable of, the liquid trill that proves so difficult for first-year French students, the glottal grunts and clicks of the Australian bush people, the thickened, abrupt consonants of German. They lose the capability as they learn English, and Lewis wondered now, and not for the first time, if childhood was not more a period of forgetting than of learning. Gage's neeks were finally found. They were also under the couch. One of Lewis's other beliefs was that in families with small children, the area under living room couches begins after a while to develop a strong and mysterious electromagnetic force that eventually sucks in all sorts of litter, everything from bottles and diaper pins to green Crayolas and old issues of Sesame Street magazine with food moldering between the pages. Gage's jacket, however, wasn't under the couch, it was halfway down the stairs. His Red Sox cap, without which Gage refused to leave the house, was the most difficult of all to find. Because it was where it belonged, in the closet. That was, naturally, the last place they looked. Where goin', daddy? Gage asked companionably, giving his father his hand. Going over in Mrs. Vinton's field, he said. Gonna go fly a kite, my man. Killite? Gage asked doubtfully. You'll like it, Lewis said. Wait a minute, kiddo. They were in the garage now. Lewis found his keyring, unlocked the little storage closet, and turned on the light. He rummaged through the closet and found the vulture, still in its store bag with the sales slip stapled to it. He had bought in the depths of mid-February, when his soul had cried out for some hope. Dat? Gage asked. This was Gage's essay for, whatever in the world might you have there, father? It's the kite, Lewis said and pulled it out of the bag. Gage watched, interested, as Lewis unfurled the vulture, which spread its wings over perhaps 5 feet of tough plastic. Its bulgy, bloodshot eyes stared out at them from its small head atop its scrawny, pinkly naked neck. Bert! Gage yelled. Bert, daddy. Got a Bert. Yeah, it's a bird, Lewis agreed, slipping the sticks into the pockets at the back of the kite and rummaging again for the 500 feet of kite twine that he had bought the same day. He looked back over his shoulder and repeated to Gage, You're gonna like it, big guy. Gage liked it. They took the kite over into Mrs. Vinton's field and Lewis got it up into the blowy late March sky first shot, although he had not flown a kite since he was, what? 12? 19 years ago? God, that was horrible. Mrs. Vinton was a woman of almost Judd's age but immeasurably more frail. She lived in a brick house at the head of her field, but now she came out only rarely. Behind the house, the field ended and the woods began. The woods that led first to. What? He said. It's your kite. You're flying it, Lewis said. You got the hammer, my man. Gage flying it? Gage said, as if asking not his father but himself for confirmation. He pulled the string experimentally. The kite nodded in the windy sky. Gage pulled the string harder. The kite swooped. Lewis and his son laughed together. Gage reached out his free hand, groping, and Lewis took it in his own. They stood together that way in the middle of Mrs. Vinton's field, 100 up at the vulture. It was a moment with his son that Lewis never forgot. As he had gone up and into the kite as a child himself, He now found himself going into Gage, his son. He felt himself shrink until he was within Gage's tiny house, looking out of the windows that were his eyes, looking out at a world that was so huge and bright, a world where Mrs. Vinton's field was nearly as big as the Bonneville salt flats, where the kite soared miles above him, the string drumming in his fist like a live thing as the wind blew around him, tumbling his hair. Kite flying. Gage cried out to his father, and Louis put his arm around Gage's shoulders and kissed the boy's cheek, in which the wind had bloomed a wild rose. "I love you, Gage," he said. It was between the two of them, and that was all right. And Gage, who now had less than 2 months to live, laughed shrilly and joyously. Kite flying, Daddy. They were still flying the kite when Rachel and Ellie came home. He and Gage had gotten it so high that they had nearly run out the string, and the face of the vulture had been lost. It was only a small black silhouette in the sky. Luce was glad to see the two of them, and he roared with laughter when Ellie dropped the string momentarily and chased it through the grass, catching it just before the tumbling, unraveling quart tube gave up the last of its twine. But having them around also changed things a little, and he was not terribly sorry to go in when, 20 minutes later, Rachel said she believed. The pet cemetery and then to the Micmac burying ground beyond it. Kites flying, Daddy. Gage screamed. Yeah, look at it go. Louis bellowed back, laughing and excited. He paid out kite twine so fast that the string grew HOR and branded thin fire across his palm. Look at that vulture, Gage. She's goin' to beat shit. Beat shit. Gage cried and laughed, high and joyously. The sun sailed out from behind a fat gray spring cloud, and the temperature seemed to go up 5 degrees almost at once. They scooed in the bright, unreliable warmth of March, straining to be apple in the high dead grass of Mrs. Vinton's field. Above Kem the vulture soared up toward the blue, higher, its plastic wings spread taut against that steady current of air, still higher, and as he had done as a child, Louis felt himself going up to it, going into it, staring down as the world took on its actual shape, the one cartographers must see in their dreams. Mrs. Vinton's field, as white and still as cobwebs following the retreat of the snore, not just a field now but a large parallelogram bounded by rock walls on 2 of its sides, and then the road at the bottom, a straight black seam, and the river Valichi vulture saw it all with its soaring, bloodshot eyes. It saw Che River like a cool gray band of steel, chunks of ice still floating in it. On the other side it saw Hampton, Newburgh, Winterport, with a ship at dock. Perhaps it saw the St. Regis Mill at Bucksport below its steaming fume of cloud, or even Land's End itself, where the Atlantic pounded the naked rock. Look at her go, Gage. Louis yelled, laughing. Gage was leaning so far back he was in danger of toppling over. A huge grin covered his face. He was waving to the kite. Louis got some slack and told Gage to hold out one of Bus' hands. Gage did, not even looking around. He couldn't take his eyes from the kite, which swung and danced in the wind and raced its shadow back and forth across the field. Louis wound the kite string twice around Gage's hand, and now he did look down, comically amazed at the strong rug and pull. What? He said. It's your kite. You're flying it, Louis said. You got the hammer, my man. Gage flying it? Gage said, as if asking not his father but himself for confirmation. He pulled the string experimentally. The kite nodded in the windy sky. Gage pulled the string harder. The kite swooped. Louis and his son laughed together. Gage reached out his free hand, groping, and Louis took it in his own. They stood together that way in the middle of Mrs. Vinton's field, 100 km up at the vulture. It was a moment with his son that Louis never forgot. As he had gone up and into the kite as a child himself, he now found himself going into Gage, his son. He felt himself shrink until he was within Gage's tiny house, looking out of the windows that were his eyes, looking out at a world that was so huge and bright, a world where Mrs. Vinton's field was nearly as big as the Bonneville salt flats, where the kite soared miles above him, the string drumming in his fist like a live thing as the wind blew around him, tumbling his hair. Kite flying. Gage cried out to his father, and Louis put his arm around Gage's shoulders and kissed the boy's cheek, in which the wind had bloomed a wild rose. "I love you, Gage," he said. It was between the two of them, and that was all right. And Gage, who now had less than 2 months to live, laughed shrilly and joyously. Kite flying, Daddy. They were still flying the kite when Rachel and Ellie came home. He and Gage had gotten it so high that they had nearly run out the string, and the face of the vulture had been lost. It was only a small black silhouette in the sky. Luce was glad to see the two of them, and he roared with laughter when Ellie dropped the string momentarily and chased it through the grass, catching it just before the tumbling, unraveling cord tube gave up the last of its twine. But having them around also changed things a little, and he was not terribly sorry to go in when, 20 minutes later, Rachel said she believed Gage had had enough of the wind. She was afraid he would get a chill. So the kite was pulled back in, fighting for the sky at every turn of the twine, at last surrendering. Louis tucked it, black wings, buggy bloodshot eyes, and all, under his arm and Empress wound it in the storage closet again. That night Gage ate an enormous supper of hot dogs and beans, and while Rachel was dressing him in his Dr. Denton's for bed, Louis took Ellie aside and had a heart-to-heart talk with her about leaving her Matt Bless around. Under other circumstances, he might have ended up shouting at her because Ellie could turn quite haughty insulting, even when accused of some mistake. It was only Bet's way of dealing with criticism, but that did not keep it from infuriating Louis when she laid it on too thick or when he was particularly tired. But this night the kite flying had left him in a fine mood, and Ellie was inclined to be reasonable. She agreed to be more careful and then went downstairs to watch TV until 8:30, a Saturday indulgence she treasured. Okay, that's out of the way, and it might even do some good. Louis thought, not knowing that marbles were really not the problem, and chills were really not the problem, that a large Orenco truck was going to be the problem, that the road was going to be the problem. As Judd Crandall had warned them it might be on that first day of August. He went upstairs that night about 15 minutes after Gage had been put to bed. He found his son quiet but still awake, drinking the last of a bottle of milk and looking contemplatively up at the ceiling. Louis took one of Gage's feet in one hand and raised it up. He kissed it, lowered it. "Good night, Gage," he said. "Kite flying, Daddy," Gage said. "It really did fly, didn't it?" Louis said, and for no reason at all he felt tears behind his eyes. "Right up to the sky, my man." "Kite flying," Gage said. "Up to the sky." He rolled over on his side, closed his eyes, and slept. Just like that, Louis was stepping into the hall when he glanced back and saw yellowy-green, disembodied eyes staring out at him from Gage's closet. The closet door was open, just a crack. His heart took a grimace lurch into his throat, and his mouth pulled back and down and he opened the closet door, thinking, Zelda, it's Zelda in the closet, her black tongue puffing out between her lips. He wasn't sure what, but of course it was only church. The cat was in the closet, and when it saw Louis it arched its back like in revealing its needle-sharp teeth. "Cat on a Halloween card." It hissed at him, its mouth partly open. "Get out of there," Louis whispered. Church hissed again. It did not move. "Get out," I said. He picked up the first thing that came to hand in the litter of Gage's toys, a bright plastic chuggy choo-choo which in this dim light was the maroon color of dried blood. He brandished it at Church. The cat not only stood its ground but hissed again. And suddenly, without even thinking, Louis threw the toy at the cat, not playing, not goofing around. He pegged the toy at the cat as hard as he could, furious at it, and scared of it too, that it should hide here in the darkened closet of his son's room and refuse to leave, as if it had a right to be there. The toy locomotive struck the cat dead center. Church uttered a squawk and fled, displaying its usual grace by slamming into the door and almost falling over on its way out. Gage stirred, muttered something, shifted position, and was still again. Louis felt a little sick. There was sweat standing out in beads on his forehead. "Louis?" Rachel, from downstairs, sounding alarmed. "Did Gage fall out of his crib?" "He's fine, honey." Church knocked over a couple of his toys. "Oh, all right." He felt irrationally or otherwise the way he might have felt if he had looked in on his son and found a snake crawling over him or a big rat perched on the bookshelf over Gage's crib. Of course it was irrational. But when it had hissed at him from the closet like that. Zelda, did you think Oz the Gweet and Tuwibble? He closed Gage's closet door, sweeping a number of toys back in with its moving foot. He listened to the tiny click of the latch. After a moment's further hesitation, he turned the closest thumbbolt. He went back to Gage's crib. In shifting around, the kid bad kicked his 2 blankets down around his knees. Louis disentangled him, pulled the blankets up, and then merely stood there, watching his son, for a long time.